Right, we're about 2/3 of the way through, and it is only fair now that we turn our attentions to League Two.
Yes.
And we will start by going to Midlothian and talking about Bonnyrigg Rose. Now, Bonnyrigg Rose's second season in the SPFL was difficult,
yes.
I think it's fair to say. Despite spending 2/3 of the season in mid-table, a really stinking run of form between February and March, where they took 2 points from 8 games, saw them sink down the division and head towards relegation. Now, this miserable sequence cost Robbie Horne his job. He was sacked in late March following a defeat at Dumbarton, and he was replaced by Callum Elliott, who came in from Cowdenbeath. It seemed like a very daft time of the season to roll the dice, but ultimately it worked because the Rose dug out 2 wins and 3 draws from the final 6 matches, and they secured their SPFL status on the penultimate game of the season. I think last time when we did this podcast and spoke about Bonnyrigg, we had fancied them to maybe finish in 8th or 9th. I think Bonnyrigg are going to finish in 8th or 9th this season. I haven't seen enough to suggest that they have really massively revolutionised or evolved since they came into the SPFL. I think Callum Elliott is more or less using the same group of players that Robbie Horne had, and I think his own signings, I don't think they're massively improved them either, so I just think it's going to be more of the same.
I actually thought they might kick on this summer. I wouldn't say I was disappointed by the standard of signings, but considering how they do have a good, they've got good numbers coming in every couple of weeks, and I understand the fact that Robbie Horne was loyal to that team that got them promoted, so I understand why he wanted to go with them. Probably wasn't, in terms of quality last summer, there wasn't enough added, I suppose, even though they had probably 50% of all the strikers in League 2 playing for them at one stage or another. Between them, there just wasn't enough quality there. But again, and this feels like quite a horrible thing to say, I suppose, and I don't mean it to, but ultimately in the League Cup stages, they've been starting games with Smart or Sadola up front. And it just feels like, without knowing too much in terms of the players that have come in, Callum Higginbotham has come in, so we know what he's all about, albeit he's now maybe 35.
Yeah.
Brought in another couple of players from Trinent. Brought in a player, is it Ben Scarborough from Luncarty, as I believe you once pronounced it on television.
That's because our producer Michael Dart told me to say it like that.
But I just don't think that they are. I keep thinking that they should be a team that, considering their setup, and it might be that even though they have good numbers coming in, maybe that is sustaining things other than the first team squad at that club. Potentially, maybe it's going on facilities, or maybe it's going on other kind of community aspects. I don't know. But I just always feel that every summer we sit here and think that is not a team that's going to be aiming for top 4 this season.
I think one of the big issues that they've got is the playing surface at New Dundas Park. I think there was talk around February, March time, maybe into April, that the surface was going to be ripped up, or the SPFL had told Bonnyrigg, you need to replace the surface because it's not up to scratch. And well, they're right in that. I mean, it's the most uneven pitch in Scotland. It certainly does give New Dundas Park a lot of character. It was a very difficult place to go and watch football. Now, that actually hasn't transpired. It's going to be the same surface that they've been playing on since they came into the SPFL. And one of the things that I noticed when Callum Elliott came in was that the team noticeably looked more progressive in what they were trying to do than Robbie Horne. I think that Robbie Horne's team, and as much as Robbie Horne seemed like a really cool guy, and I was really sorry to see him move on, because I think he took it quite hard. He's got a lot of affection for Bonnyrigg. They were brutal to watch. It was long ball football, trying to get it up as quickly as possible. And again, there's, like I said, we've touched on it earlier about sort of like this kind of football, but it was particularly, I don't know if it was the fact New Dundas Park's a really small park, but just seeing that kind of football, I'd like to go to New Dundas Park, but I didn't like watching football there. I felt very stressed. There was bits where I started worrying myself, like I was getting big scratch marks on my wrist watching football at Bonnyrigg. And
it's certainly attritional.
They did get better under Elliott, but I think that the problem Elliott's got is that it's very easy to try and implement that sort of style of play in April, and when the pitches are a bit better, what's New Dundas Park going to look like into November, December and January? So I think that it's all very well looking to play this kind of football, But I just don't think they're going to be able to sustain it. And I think that's one of the reasons we're going to see more of the same. The personnel that's turned over, I think like the guys, the long-serving players, Ross Gray, Johnny Stewart, they've moved on to Trinent. And there's 2 players have come from Trinent, one of whom is Callum Higginbotham. I think the other one is Shaughan Murphy, who I think's quite well thought of, good ball-winning midfielder. I think he'll add a bit of dig and a wee bit of freshness to the middle of the park. I'm not sure if Higginbotham's still quite got it. It's not often you see guys at that age going down into the Lowland League and coming back up the way. Remember Liam Buchanan? They actually signed him from Berwick Rangers after their financial problems, and he was there for a couple of months and then went back to Berwick. So I'm going to assume that Elliot, there's not a lot of money to play from, but I assume that Elliot is having the same things that a lot of teams in League 2 are having, and it's just very difficult to try and attract players.
I think as well, when I suppose it's just the case at any level, but players, like what are players prioritising in terms of if they have 2 or 3 offers on the table, what are they taking into consideration? So travel will come into it. I would also imagine they'll take into consideration the environment that they're being asked to play in on every second Saturday, and potentially that pitch might be off-putting to kind of potential players. And if there's only 30, 40 quid a difference in terms of what Bonnyrigg might offer and somebody else, then maybe the pitch might be off-putting. I don't know.
It could be. It certainly it could well be, and I don't know if that's impacted what Elliot's been able to do. I mean, the other guys that he's signed in, Aaron Arnott, he's brought in from Wraith Rovers. The other player they've signed, Bradley Rodden, came in from Stennismuir.
Something you're familiar with?
I was actually surprised that Rodden got another SPFL team. I think that he's fit and enthusiastic, and he'll put himself about a bit. Quite chaotic, quite unpredictable. But I just don't think he's very good. I don't think he adds a lot of quality. He came in from Forfar Athletic, and I think they were quite quite happy to see him move on. And then I think very quickly we signed him, and we're like, this guy doesn't have it. I mean, he has scored already for Bonnyrigg. He scored a late equaliser against Annan Athletic, so he has already brought something. But it's the big problem that Bonnyrigg have had. You joked about it earlier, the fact that they've signed so many different forwards. It's like you've brought Rodden into the mix alongside Osadollar. I think Osadollar's good games come around like once every 9 or 10. There are times where he does look like a smash, and he can do a trick or a bit of skill or something, or he can score a goal and you're like, woof, that's really impressive. It just doesn't happen very often.
Kieran McGacky's still there, I think.
I would say that with McGackie though, you're keeping him on. It's
fitness. It's fitness with him.
Fitness is a big problem, and the fact that he is, I think, quite a diminished role. He's more of a substitute this season, where he'll come on, and again, chaotic is something that you're going to get from him. I think that he's a really important for the club and the community, and how that relationship they have with the supporters. I think that I don't know if it's just exclusively a Bonnyrigg thing or other clubs feel like this, but I do feel like with Bonnyrigg, given the fact that they have spent a lot of time in the East of Scotland League, and I think if you're playing in that division, it becomes very important to the town, for the town to see the football team do well. If you know what I mean, there's a lot of local pride involved for it, and I think that there is still a degree of that mentality that's come up into the SPFL, and so having guys like Kieran McGackie, who is like a local player, someone who has got such strong links to the community and who really is emblematic of the club's ethos, I do think that's really important. I'm not sure necessarily what you're getting from him on the pitch, but he does make things quite interesting. Like he is, when McGackie comes on, you know he's there, and I think he is quite it can be a handful.
I think all fans would love it if there was 2 or 3 players in their team that were local that you could relate to it, especially if they've been on a journey with the club. But I do think that fans would rather just see a winning team. So I understand what you're saying, but I sure like Bonnyrigg fans would like them to bring in 1 or 2 forwards that are just up to the level that they need to kick on, and I haven't seen that in any of their seasons so far.
No, that's been that has been a big issue. I'm really surprised that hasn't. That here we are. This is the 3rd season, and we haven't seen like a proper quality forward. Who knows? They might get something out of Rodden. They might get something out of Rodden that Brian Rice, Andy Graham, Gary Naismith couldn't do. So I hope he does kick on. But there's quality within the team. There's quality. They've got a really good goalkeeper in Paddy Martin. Unfortunately, he's got a long-term injury that's necessitated Tom Ritchie coming in on loan from Aberdeen, but hopefully Martin's back playing soon because he really is a smashing goalkeeper, one of the best in the division. Josh Grigor missed the latter part of the season through injury, developed into a really good lower league centre-back. If Elliott does want to play football, Grigor will be important to that because he can play a little bit. They are dangerous from set pieces. Lee Curry, Neil Martiniuk.
Good at scoring penalties.
I've got specialists from dead balls here to make it sound a bit fancier, but there are plenty of big lads in the team that you can dump the ball on top of, and it's people might not think it's, or people might think it's a bit reductive to say that, but set pieces are massively important at any level. And if you've got guys that can put dangerous balls into the box and guys that can take advantage of it, then that is a handy thing to have in your arsenal. But going back to what we were discussing earlier there about what Bonnyrigg want to do, if they can kick on and play this more attractive brand of football, then fantastic, because you want to see your club evolve. I'm just not sure they'll be able to do it in the rigours of League Two, and I think it's going to be another tricky season for them.
And I don't think it'll be tricky because of a team that we'll come on to later.
Of course.
But I would be surprised if they finish mid-table. And by that I mean like 5th or 6th. I see them again finishing, you're right, 8th, something like that. And
fair play to the supporters for sticking around with them, because I mean, not that you deserve credit for following your club, but I think if you're used to a diet of winning, and that's certainly what Bonnyrigg were used to up until coming into the SPFL, you might think that, God, what am I going along for if my team aren't winning most weeks? I'm not saying that that's a very old firm mindset, but you know what I mean, there might be a sort of something to be enjoyed from watching a team that you care about win, and it hasn't happened a lot for Bonnyrigg so far these past couple of years. Maybe they're not very well, but I think that they are gradually adjusting to life in the SPFL, where it's a bit more expensive to get in, where there is a bit better quality. You are the underdogs, you're not the better side. And I think that Bonnyrigg will kick on in time. I think you're right. I think it will be a testing season, but there's going to be a team who are going to be doing everyone a favour, much like last season in League One. There'll be a team that's doing everyone a favour. So I'm going for 9th.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Now, let's go from the bottom of the division to a team who are probably going to, let's just have it, a team that are probably going to win it.
Yeah. Like of the 3 divisions that we have covered,
there are 2 certainties.
Certainly, this is very much a certainty.
There are 2 certainties. I think I know who's going to finish top of the division. I know who's going to finish bottom of the division. And the team that's going to finish top of the division is going to be Clyde.
Yes.
And it's been a remarkable turnaround. It was a very challenging season last year for Clyde. I mean, they began the campaign with Brian McLean and technically Jim Duffy in the dugout, and they had assigned a squad of players that were just nowhere near good enough to compete in League Two. McLean and Duffy both left the club in November, and Ian McCall came in as manager and was given a lot of money to spend. And despite moving on the dross and signing some high quality ringers, results only really picked up sporadically, and they did just about enough to finish the season in 9th place. But that was last season. This is now, and the good times and the money is keeping on rolling, because they've embarked on perhaps the most impressive pound for pound, the most impressive recruitment drive in the SPFL. Money's been lavished on this group of players. They've strengthened in every single area of the pitch. They've got depth in almost every area of the pitch, and to me it seems inconceivable that Clyde won't win the division this year.
Same. And in terms of, like, so my notes I have that they have the best starting 11 in the division by a mile.
Yep.
They have depth, which most clubs can't, in fact, arguably all clubs don't have in this division. I think they have the best manager in the league in Ian McCall. And even if something did happen and they were struggling in January, which I don't foresee happening at all, or even if it was tight, like even if it was only like 2 or 3 points in it, they have somebody in, a chairman in Alan Maitland, who is happy to spend the money to bring in another 2 or 3 bodies.
Don't think it's Alan Maitland's money, right enough. I think it's someone else's money. There's another backer, there's a backer.
Right, okay.
So I don't think it's Alan Maitland's money. But you know, we talked about clubs spending money on infrastructure like United. Doesn't matter. Just get the players out in the pitch. Let them cook. And that's. I don't know if Clyde have got other irons in the fire after the Crown Point that move fell through.
again, something that's went quiet because
they're doing so well on the
doing
pitch. Yeah.
They do need someplace to. It's another discussion, but they need somewhere to put down roots.
Yes, of course. But why do that when you can turn Logan Dunnicky into a centre back? This is incredible, man. This is perhaps one of the few successes from Jim Duffy's time as director of football at the club. Logan Dunnicky was picked up from Motherwell. He is nominally a centre back / right back, very tall guy. Definitely has something about him. One of the few, like I say, one of the few success stories. But in pre-season, he has been converted to a centre forward. And fucking hell, he looks like it looks like you're watching Didier Drogba. There's no other way to say it. It looks like you're watching Didier Drogba. He has scored 3 goals already in pre-season, including, I've got to say, man, I think it's one of the best goals I've seen this season. This was against Partick Thistle. We referenced this earlier when we previewed them, where it's a Tommy Robson plays a long ball out of defence. Dunnicky flicks it over the head of Lee Ashcroft, then sprints round him, takes a touch and finishes, and it's like something Didier Drogba would do. It is like something Drogba would do. And since then, he's been updated to forward. He's moved from, on the club website, he has been moved. He's no longer a classed as defender. He's now classed as a forward on the club website.
And the shame of that is, well, I think it's a shame, but maybe it'll be a shame for players that we regard as forwards, because they've brought in Lee Connolly and Kyle Connell and Jordan Allen. You would imagine he's surely fourth choice in terms of those three. Actually, maybe he's not.
Maybe he's not.
Maybe he's first choice.
But it was like, seeing that goal, I saw it on Twitter that somebody had shared a video of Drogba scoring a goal where it was again, I think it was against Tottenham at Wembley. It's a punt up the park and he takes the thing in his chest and swivels, holds the boy off and rifles it into the net. That's not a million miles away from what Dunnicky's doing there. And he's signed a new contract until 2026, which I think they've recognised that this guy's got a bit about him. But just incredible foresight from McCall to move him further forward. I mean, Clyde had a player in the books a couple of years ago called Brian McQueen, who was a centre back that they played up front from time to time. But this from Dunnicky,
less success.
Less success. I mean, I didn't hear me call Brian McQueen saying he looked like Didier Drogba. But it's astonishing, absolutely astonishing. I'm really, really keen to see how he develops and how he progresses as the season goes on.
In terms of a Clyde squad, this must be the most talented group of players they've had in a long, long time. More so than in terms of the spread of quality, more so than they've had in a very long time.
I was going to say, I think what was a pretty good team was Danny Lennon's team that won promotion through the playoffs in 2018-2019.
They had that talisman, of course, and David Goodwillie, I suppose.
Yeah, I was going to say, a player who was miles ahead of everyone else, but just remember he was found guilty of rape in a civil court, and that finished his football career, and that's why he was playing for Clyde. But alongside Logan Dunnicky, we've talked about the number of forwards that they've got there. Jordan Allen, supreme piece of business. I think he was one of the most coveted strikers in the lower leagues. I think when Falkirk were leaving him out of squads, I think everyone like mongooses sensing an attack. like can we get Jordan Allen? And we mentioned there, I think Cali Thistle, Queen of the South were interested in him, but he goes back to Clyde, where manager he knows very well, supporters who absolutely adore him, and where he'll score. Can you imagine him scoring like 15 goals for the season and wins the league with Clyde? But on top of that as well, players you've mentioned, Kyle Connell, who had a good loan spell at East Fife, I think from Kilmarnock, never really kicked on at a Cove or East Kilbride, but hopefully he can do the business here.
I think I know there's not a lot of Cove Rangers fans on Pine Bravo, but I think they were of the opinion that there was enough there to maybe warrant him staying around, and I think he was under contract for this season, but ultimately he was moved on. I'm not entirely sure about him, certainly on the championship level when he was at Wraith. I would imagine it is enough about him to be a success in League Two. I
do think with Dunnicky's rise to prominence, I think he's kicked down the food chain a little bit more. There's Martin Rennie as well, someone who, for a good touch for a big man, someone who's tall, someone who can do good things with the ball, someone who can, I think he operates as a wide forward. They look to try and play diagonals over to him and get him to head them in. Whether or not they'll probably look to change now, they've got better quality of players and they don't necessarily need to do that now. And then they've got Lee Connolly, who they brought in from Queen of the South. I mentioned earlier about his attitude, where I think he patently did not like Marvin Bartley and would eat from a bucket of KFC. I think they prepared, the team had prepared meals for the players, and he ate KFC. Am I right in thinking that's the story there? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's obviously not a good look for him. But
and Ian McCall won't put up with that.
Ian McCall,
if he continues with that attitude, then he'll be bummed out.
Yeah, definitely. That would simply be the case. We're not going to
just eat fried chicken.
We're not going to tolerate. I mean, he did score a very good goal against Edinburgh City in the League Cup group stages there. So from all those forward options, it really is an embarrassment of riches. And I suppose the difficulty that Ian McCall will have is trying to accommodate them all and finding a system that works well for them. I'm sure it's a long season, so everyone's going to get their shot at some point. But it's a good problem to have, rather than where it's just like Rennie and Connor Young up front, like it was this time last year. Or they had like Dylan Duncan. I think that was the boy's name they signed from like the University of Glasgow.
And I think I'm right in saying that every single signing that Ian McCall has brought in has been from a higher division. And I know that doesn't necessarily mean that they are all going to move down a level and therefore be successful. But it does speak to the fact that they are, you know exactly what they're trying to do, and that is win this division and kind of kick on. Like even just next season, it feels like they have a very, very good squad.
Aye,
for the lower leagues, never mind League Two.
I mean so we're talking about the forward options. I mean, go further back. You've got Brian Kinnear. He was signed back in January. Good goalkeeper. Yep. You know, he spelled with Falkirk, Rangers, West Ham. I think he was okay at Falkirk. He's been absolutely fine for Clyde. They've got proper fullbacks. Tommy Robson and Jordan Houston.
I was very, very. I mean, I think I was surprised at Houston. I was very surprised at Tommy Robson. I thought he could have got a club a good bit higher up the food chain.
Yeah, definitely. But whatever McCall's selling, he's certainly buying. And Houston's a really good player, but I think another player whose career's been impacted by injuries. But if he can stay fit, he'll certainly be a boon. And you've got Lee Hamilton, who was brilliant last season alongside Craig Howie. So you go across that back five, that's really strong. And then you come into the middle of the park and there's plenty of options there. Like if Barry Cudahy, he's another player, if he can stay fit, that's really good. Ray Grant, Marley Redfern, Robbie Leach, Dom Docherty, a player I've always liked from his time at like Stirling Albion and Annan. You got like Liam Scullion as well, plays a bit further forward. He's turned into a really good lower league player. Obviously, the spitting incident at Bonnyrigg wasn't very clever. Was he suspended? He must have only been suspended for a couple of games for that.
I think it was a 2-game.
Just a 2-game ban.
I was surprised at how lenient that was.
Yeah, I thought he'd have missed for games for the rest of the season, but I'm sure he looks back at that and is pretty embarrassed about it. Talking at him on a footballing level, class. Like he is developing into a right good player, and you can tell him. We had him on loan at Stennismuir a couple of years ago under Colin McMenamin. Wasn't he very good? But you can see he was quite waif-like and quite skinny, but he's bulked up a bit. Strong player, and on top of that, he's quite technical as well. I mean, like if I was a Clyde fan, I would be absolutely raring to go this season, and it's not often Clyde fans can say that.
No, like any time you've logged into the Clyde thread for a number of years now, it has been a lesson in abject misery, but they are quite rightly thoroughly excited about this, and rightly so. They'll win it. I think they'll win this like by a mile.
Mm-hmm. And you go to Edinburgh and you beat Edinburgh. I mean, that's a team who are like miles off the pace compared to everyone else, but at least you've got an idea of the kind of team that you're going to be playing in the division. You beat them 5-0, turn them over, no bother. But then you play Partick Thistle and you give them a right good go. And one of the goals was scored by like a chaotic pass back from Lee Ashcroft. But Logan Dunacky's goals, we've spoken about that first one, the second one, the winning goal in like 86 minutes, an absolute bullet header, like brilliant. And on top of that as well, they've got loads of big guys in there as well. That defence is all really, really big guys, big strikers. They just seem to have, on paper certainly, so many different ways of cutting teams open, so many different options. And it would be on paper a travesty if they don't win that division this year.
And I think maybe it isn't important, but just the fact that it was Clyde against Partick Thistle, and regardless of the nature of the game, okay, it's a kind of group stage League Cup tie, but the fact that it was an away game at your local rivals, it looked like they had like a really, really big travelling support as well, and that kind of, I know they lost to Montrose next time up, but it kind of feels like, again, it just, everything is gathering momentum as to start this league campaign.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're both going for champions.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be something really bad would have to happen to stop them from doing it, and even if that does happen, I think they have the capacity to go and spend more money on. So fair play. It must be great if you are a fan of a club and then there's another fan who's really wealthy that wants to invest in it. And it's like, okay, what do you want? You want bibs for the training ground? Nah, let's get strikers in. Yes. That's what we're going to get. That's what we're going to do. Right, we will move from Hamilton to Methil and we'll talk about East Fife. The 2023-24 season, underwhelming for East Fife. I expected them to reprise their top 4 finish of the previous campaign, but they spent long periods of the season jobbing around in lower mid-table, and it ultimately cost Greg McDonald his job. He resigned as the club fell as low in 9th place, following a defeat to Elgin City in early February. He was replaced by Dick Campbell, and apparently the deal to bring in Campbell was done long before McDonald tendered his resignation. There's talk of that.
It was certainly announced very quickly.
Very, very, very quickly, yes. But nevertheless, the Fifers went on a 9-game beaten run before the campaign completely flatlined and they eventually finished in 6th place. But broadly speaking, a very positive League Cup campaign. 2 wins and a draw. They've scored a lot of goals. They've signed quite well. They've retained quite well. Good managers in the dugout. I think a good season is ahead.
To a degree.
Okay.
To a degree. Fair play to them. They are I think in all the time we've done this is the first time we have previewed a team that when I've put together the ins and outs of the players, it's the first time they've had the same player who is both in the in column and the out column.
Yes.
As of course Ali Adams.
Aye. So Ali Adams, he very famously scored for Arbroath against Wraith Rovers last year. How embarrassing for your lot that the really sub goalie's brought on and scores an absolute stunning goal. He signed for East Fife. Dick Campbell had signed for Arbroath that left the club, and then Ali Adams was effectively ostracised by Jim McIntyre. He signed for East Fife. But then a week later, East Fife said that he'd reneged on his contract, citing work commitments. Now, I was sent a reel of Ali Adams. He said he's packed in football to get jacked, and he's taking part in an exercise program called Get Ripped or Die Trying. And I'll say this: the man is lifting a ludicrous volume of steel. I've used the word ludicrous quite a lot.
Get ripped or die trying. There must be some kind of middle ground.
Telling you, man. Well, maybe you could get ripped and enjoy yourself. No, he's going to get ripped and die trying. So, absolutely remarkable. So, I don't know what he's going to do. He's probably going to get big and strong so he can go and fight Jim McIntyre. I'm going to assume that's what he's got planned.
And take that goal of the season.
That's
trophy that he demanded.
Finally, so that's Ali Adams. We hardly knew you in for a week.
In terms of the rest of East Fife's transfer dealings, I expected more. Like there was a point towards the end of last season. It was very much when because there was a point last season where I thought that they were going to finish in the top 4. Like they were doing so well under Dick Campbell. Then
lost the last 4 matches,
so it wasn't going so well. And I can't remember what game it was, but you could tell that Dick Campbell was very much, he kind of had enough, and he talked about the fact that like he needed to bring in a large number of players to do what he wanted to do, which obviously get East Fife out of this division. Kind of feels like I was expecting more. I was expecting a kind of bigger turnover. It feels like he is going to be heavily reliant on the same players that didn't really do quite well enough last time around, and I wondered if either he felt that maybe there would have been a bigger budget or that he could have attracted more players from Arbroath.
I think it was just the typical Dick Campbell bullshit.
To
try and motivate. I think it was he was annoyed, and maybe he's trying to use that to motivate them, like saying, like, "I'll get better players in." As simple as that, and then he's effectively kept them. I was the same. I was expecting him to do a lot more business, but I think that what he's kept is maybe just the new manager coming in, and maybe it's some of the personality of Dick Campbell, where you can take something that has appeared to be a bit stale and suddenly it there's a bit of a degree of excitement about it, just a sort of new broom.
Yeah, I expect Dick Campbell to get more out of this squad, and over the course of a season I think they will do better. I just thought they would have been bringing in more new faces than what they have.
Well, let's talk about the new faces. The first new face that they signed is someone very well known in the lower leagues, and that was Andy Munro from Forfar Athletic. Now, I was sure that he'd played under Dick Campbell in the past, but apparently not. He's just played for clubs that Dick Campbell's managed. Yes, aye. Andy Munro, I kind of know Andy Munro personally. I've met him a couple of times. I think he's a lovely guy. I think that he is a very capable stopper. He is someone that can head the ball, can kick the ball, can shout at people, motivate them around them, good for odd couple of goals. I think there's sometimes he can get too interested in shouts for the crowd. Like for some reason, he gets pelters anytime he turns up at his Stenny, and he's quite good with it. He gives a bit back, but you're getting involved with what's going on in the crowd. You should be concentrating on the game rather than looking round to take a look at people in the stand. And there's sometimes you can showboat a wee bit, and there's times where he'll take the ball out of defence and want to roll his studs over the top of it and can lose possession. See if he just stuck to when he gets to possession, going to give it to Kieran Miller or Jess Norrie or one of the better ball players in front of you. If he did that, he'd be fine. But there's a reason why he's playing in the lower leagues and not elsewhere.
Him and Brian Easton at centre half. Not so sure. I thought Brian Easton might have been moved on in the summer, but that again, he's been
just
kept on.
I think that's just an experienced player, someone who I thought he was fine for East Fife last season since leaving Hamilton Accies, and just someone who can read the game well, quite big, quite strong, decent distribution off his left peg. I thought he was fine for East Fife. Didn't necessarily stand out for me. Finally, as well, they have replaced Alan Fleming. You'll be delighted to know that.
I thought he had a really good season last year after I was critical of him, so I thought he was decent.
The stuff you said about him, absolutely horrible. They've brought Liam McFarlane. He's coming loan from Heart of Midlothian.
Highly regarded.
Apparently so. My Hearts correspondent says that he is quite highly regarded. He's a very big laddie.
Aye.
He looks like a bully from Moor Willie. But he's played every League Cup tie, and I think he has usurped Alan Fleming as the number one. Fleming must be 38, 39, maybe older.
Yep.
Yeah, so maybe it's time for him to move on. And I think that
good backup though, if required.
Definitely, and I think that's one of the problems. We talked about with Harry Stone. You're going to get a good goalkeeper in your books, but he will be learning and making mistakes on Dick Campbell's time. So that's something he'll need to be patient with. The rest of the defence is quite as well. You've got like Stuart Murdoch, Rhys Peggy's coming from Bonnyrigg. He's a pretty solid fullback. You've got Pat Slattery and Sean Docherty in reserve. And further forward, we mentioned the midfielders like Kieran Miller and Jess Norrie. I think they've already set up quite a decent partnership. They look to play like the 4-2-3-1. They'll play in the double pivot role. And Norrie was someone who Campbell had signed for Arbroath. And I think he and Miller have looked quite handy when paired alongside one another.
And Jack Healy as well, who I quite like, but he didn't perform as well last season as maybe the season previous.
No, I've got it down here that same with him and Liam Newton. I think it's a big season expected from them both, especially Healy, because when he first broke into the team, I thought this guy looks like an absolute superstar. He really fancies himself, and that comes across in the way he plays. He's got a really good delivery and likes to take a man on, confident player, but he just didn't quite hit the same heights as last season. And I think that's maybe why a move elsewhere didn't come about. The pair of them are out of contract at the end of the season, but I think if they can knuckle down and do well and impress, then those opportunities will come. I think whoever signs them will have to pay a development fee to East Fife given they've come through, but that's what you want to see ultimately. You want to see a team like East Fife developing players and can move them on. So hope they both do well there.
And then up top, like Nathan Austin, like we know we can score goals. Again, I fully expected a wee bit more of that. I think he was out. Did he miss a chunk of the season with injury?
He could well have done. He could well have only 13 goals last season. I think that the way he wants to play, though, he likes running onto balls. Like, I think that there's times where going long isn't in his best interest. It's not necessarily his Fife's best interest, but if you can slip balls into him, and there's boys in the team that can do it, like Alan Troughton, what a start to the campaign he had with those 3 goals against Great Morton, Alan Troughton and Conor McManus, then you've got guys there that can give him the service. But going long to him, I just don't think that plays to his strengths. So try to find alternatives to get the best from him. That's what you do, but it's easier said than done. It's like lower league Scottish football. You're not going to be able to play killer passes all the time.
I think everything you said makes sense, and I do think that they will do incrementally better, but I think they'll be a long way away from Clyde.
I think they need a striker to bolster the team. I think Alan Troughton, you don't really call him a forward these days.
Scott Shepherd is full of work rate, but
Scott Shepherd will work hard.
That's about it, maybe.
And
needs to shave his head.
Needs to shave his. Thank you, thank you. I do think they need another striker, but that's the same. That'll be the same thing for everyone else. Good group of players and a good manager as well. I think there are times where it can be easy to lose sight of Dick Campbell, because I'll admit, like, towards the end of his time at Arbroath, I did get fed up of him. I thought he became a bit of a parody of himself. Then we're going to see a game where they took on Hamilton and he got sent off midway through the first half just for complaining at the referee. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. Like, there's no need for you've been told off once. You don't need to keep on going on at it. And I just got fed up. But I think that the fact that he's moved away from Arbroath to a different team, he freshens up East Fife, and East Fife freshens up him as well. So I don't think they'll challenge Clyde for the title, but I do think they'll get a top 4 finish.
Yes, I think so as well.
Very good. Now we will move Shaughan to the capital city, and we said that if Clyde are a sure thing to win the division, the other thing I am certain of is that Edinburgh City will finish bottom of League 2. Last year was horrendous for everyone associated with the club. Their backer, Tom Tracy, had pulled out and passed the club over to a consortium of fans, and a number of high-profile players moved on, and they were always expected to struggle at the foot of the table. Alan Maybury, the manager, unexpectedly left in October, and he was replaced by Michael McIndoe, a very left-field appointment. The former manager of Greater 2008 was once described as the most hated man in football. Look up that Athletic article. And around this time, shortly after, stories began to emerge of severe financial mismanagement, and the remaining players all departed en masse to be replaced by unwanted youngsters, jobbers, cast-off degenerates, whatever it was. And then in January came the coup de grace. The club were docked 6 points by the SPFL for, and I quote, failing to pay their players' wages on time and defaulting on tax obligations to HMRC, as well as not engaging fully in the disciplinary process, leading to further breaches of SPFL rules. And that effectively confirmed the relegation, and they would finish the season with just 8 points. Coming into this new campaign, there was street talk they wouldn't even make it through the summer, that they would fold, drop out the SPFL, and thankfully that did not come to pass, because they achieved their broad license at the end of June, and in months of speculation about the future of the club, and certainly in the short and medium term at least, the fans have got a team to support. The squad has been completely turned over. I think there's probably 2 players that remain from last season's team. I think McIndoe's got an absolutely enormous job in his hands to keep this team up.
Aye, I mean, in terms of the positives, so like, see when we discussed Stranraer, East Kilbride, as much as fantastic game, East Kilbride lost, Stranraer retaining their position in League 2. My thought at that point was actually East Kilbride probably would be in League 2 this season, because you're already starting to hear rumbles about the difficult position that Edinburgh were in terms of getting that bronze licence. And you have to say fair play to everybody that I suppose is working behind the scenes, that have kind of rolled up their sleeves, ensured that licence is in place, and ultimately managed to sustain Edinburgh as a League 2 club. And that's brilliant. The problem is, in terms of what they do after that point, they've kept the club going, but you can only spend what you have at that point. And you can tell from the players that have come in, from the teams that they've come in from, that their budget appears to be miles away from everybody else in League 2. And I would be astonished if they are able to keep away for 10th position.
Aye, I think that you talk about I can only talk about the players that I've heard of, to be honest. There's and it's not to try and be smart or anything like that. It's like legitimately, when you're seeing like a goalkeeper coming in from like the Vale of Leven, then you're just like, if that's the level that they're recruiting from, guys from Bonnyrigg United, like the University of Stirling and so on. It's not to be smart or anything like that. It's just like, I genuinely don't know anything about these group of players. What I think they've done is they have identified a spine of players, 4 players, goalkeeper, centre-back, central midfielder and striker. I think these 4 guys are getting paid a little bit more money than everyone else. But even then, I think that these 4 guys, who I can talk about with some degree of confidence, it'll be beyond them to try and make this club competitive.
And I suppose in terms of like we have sat here in the past, it might have been a season that Queen's Park had almost exclusively signed players from out with the SPFL, and I don't think they did finish bottom. But regardless, I don't think that is I think that's unusual. Put it that way.
Aye. So the boys that they have signed, like that we can talk about. Mark Weir, first of all, he's a goalkeeper from Stirling Albion. He is very experienced. He was formerly at Bonnyrigg before moving to the Beanos. Ended up replacing Blair Curry as the number one, and like solid goalkeeper. Not the most mobile of goalkeepers. I think he struggles to deal with shots that are down low and quite close to him. But I think he's like commanding, can kick the ball well, like come out for crosses and so on. And I think he's going to be very tested.
He'll be busy
this season.
Certainly, put it that way.
The defender that they've brought in, Eden Lynch, coming from Stennismuir, league champion Eden Lynch coming from Stennismuir, can play all across the back four and probably most likely to play at centre back. I think he's probably better used at right back. I think I was quite down on him when I spoke about him at times on this podcast.
But your opinion of him certainly changed the longer the season went.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Lynch became a bit of a cult hero at Stennismuir. I think, and eventually, like beloved by supporters who were very sorry to see him go at the end of the day, because there was something really like earnest about him, like smashing big guy. Anytime you got talking to him, he was quite quiet and just like really smiley and really, really positive. So I really, really liked him, and so I do feel a bit bad about saying that he ran like he was put a towel on to answer a telephone. I do feel a bit bad about saying that. But I mean, he did contribute. He played a lot more than expected. He ended up.
See, going back to his running style, so do you mean like, does he always have his hands like on his?
No, he does it sort of. He does it sort of a kind of. It's hard to describe. I'm doing this sort of like doing a comedy policeman with his elbows. But he'd a very distinctive running style. I think he played a lot more than he anticipated last season, because he came in to replace Ross Meakin after a red card, and then Stennismuir just kept on winning, went on that streak, and he played a massive part of that. So he has played a huge part in Stennismuir's history. Let the record show, Eden Lynch has played a massive part in Stennismuir's history. I always got the impression he was the kind of player who needed someone more experienced and someone more vocal alongside him to tell him what to do.
He's not going to have that.
And he's not going to have that. He's not going to have Gregor Buchanan alongside him. And on top of that, I think that's why I think he's better at right back, where he's out the way a wee bit. Because at centre back, he had a really bad mistake against Clyde, where he tried to header it back to the goalkeeper and it fell short. So I watch out for that. But he can head and kick the ball, and he's big and strong. And I hope that he can do them a turn. I really do. The other one's John Robertson.
Yep.
Of course, midfielder coming from Alloa Athletic. He's been installed as captain, and very experienced professional. I think he'll be a great player to have around the place. Can play in midfield, can play at right back. Didn't feature often last season, so hopefully he has overcome his fitness issues.
But 7 now, maybe.
If you get him, if you get a fit John Robertson, though, he's a smashing player.
Yep.
Like smashing player. I think that when Alloa Athletic were releasing their players, I think they were quite like, Andy Graham was quite like not on the statement of the club. He was quite non-committal about it, and saying like, wish the boys all well for the future. But he left special praise for John Robertson, like saying how great a guy he is and how professional he is. So hopefully Michael McIndoe and the young boys around him can get the benefit from that. And the final player is Connor Young, who they signed from Clyde, who got 4 goals last season. Him and Martin Rennie dovetailed quite well alongside each other. But I think that we're at the stage now, particularly when Clyde had a bit of money to spend on players, he just became surplus to requirements, and so he's pitched up at Edinburgh. So they're the 4 players. I'm going to assume that money has bit spent on. They're getting a wee bit more than everyone else. Just don't think it's enough.
No, and I mean the only thing I'm kind of clinging to is if there is enough quality from the players that we don't know. And I remember the amount of times we spoke about Clyde in the first half of the season, and we spoke about the fact that how many points are being costed by the fact they didn't have a goalkeeper. Kind of feels like the Edinburgh, like, Weir's okay.
Yeah.
So they're probably well served in that area, but not necessarily anywhere else. Yeah. So you would need to be a very positive person to think that they are going to have even finished 9th.
Yeah, I mean the rest of the signs they've made, we listed some of the clubs. It seems to be like offcuts from Edinburgh Midlothian clubs. You've got like Spartans, Bonnyrigg, and so on. none of them are particularly experienced. And we made this point when we were talking about, who were we talking about earlier? And we said one player will comply. Talking about Inverness, Caledonian, Thistle. I think Edinburgh will be the same sort of thing, where if you were to bring their cumulative number of senior appearances, like John Robertson will massively outstrip, same with Mark Weir, they will massively outstrip everyone else. But it's a difficult season. I mean, one of the players I did meet in Munich, Quinn Mitchell, the young defender that plays for them. I was very drunk. Very drunk. So I was sitting with him and his dad, and I really wish I could remember the conversation, because I actually think it was probably very interesting. I was asking him just about like the season just passed and how it had all gone, and I'm sure his answers were really fascinating. I can't remember. So to Quinn, if you're listening, to Quinn and to your dad, I'm really sorry. I'm really, really sorry.
I'm sure they enjoyed meeting you as well, though.
Oh, I don't think I'm not watching that television show again. That guy's weird. How do you think Michael McIndoe will get on?
I mean, I suppose it depends what you are expecting from him. I think Edinburgh will finish 10th. So how do you quantify that? Like, I think that's probably what I expect. I mean, if he can do better than that, if they can win a few games, if they can even be in that bottom position, but play like a club that could potentially win the playoff, then I think he's done very, very well. But I don't see it.
I'm sure I listened to the podcast that Fowler did with Ali Moncrief talking about Edinburgh. I think it was after the points deduction, and because I'm sure we did a podcast at that point where I can't remember exactly the circumstances, but I said that week, I think Edinburgh can catch Annan, and then like the day after that podcast had gone out, it came out they had like a points deduction. So I immediately dated it. But up until that point, he really did look as though he really was beginning to get a tune out of them. And he said on that podcast, Ali Moncrief had said something like McIndoe, after that points deduction, said, well, rather than focusing on, we've got a points deduction, he was like, well, it's going to be even better when we actually catch up with Annan and finish in 9th. So I think it's that degree of positivity that you're going to need around the place.
Fantasy.
Or fantasy, yeah. But he's going to, for these young guys, if I remember correctly from his interviews last season, it was all about trying to sell the club to young guys to come in, get game experience and move on elsewhere. And I think that's that positivity and that understanding, he's really going to have to lean on that to try and get the best out of this group.
I mean, if he's going to be, and you're right, like almost even right towards the end of the season, he still came across quite positively. Mm-hmm. That must be a struggle to do when you are going into games, you know, almost certainly, you're not just going to lose, you're going to lose quite heavily. Mm-hmm. Now, they might not lose heavily every week in League Two, but I think they will lose considerably more games than they win or draw. If he still has that positivity after that, then fair play to him.
And I know that there's a certain element of the Edinburgh City support that don't particularly like you.
So I was dubbed in the group chat that Fife idiot. I mean, that's hardly the end of the world. But that was because I said that I felt that they were going to be the first team to come up to the SPFL and then go back down again.
Let's see who the Fife idiot is in 12 months' time, shall we? You know, there's just a couple more things about Edinburgh. There's been crowd trouble in their pre-season friendlies. There was a game against Broxburn that was abandoned because young fans let off flares, and as a result, the club have introduced a membership scheme for the younger fans to keep a track of them.
Is that like? Will they be able to bring that in? It almost feels like there's probably laws against that.
I don't know. I just thought it was worth mentioning because you think Edinburgh City are I'm going to assume they're probably the smallest supported club in the SPFL, but they do have this really degenerate band of ultras that have attached themselves to them.
So like you're, I don't know, 10 for example, right? And you're filling in this form to say, I am under 16, here's my name, here's where I live. Where are Edinburgh storing this information? Doesn't feel like that's the type of information you should be storing about minors. I don't know if it's been well thought through.
Yeah, like I say, I just hope they've got their disclosure form, whoever is keeping a hold of that information. And because they've got this element, this perhaps unsavoury element that's attached themselves to the club, I do think their games against the Spartans are going to be quite tidy. I'm not sure if that young team at Spartans are no longer welcome at the club. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, you've got that element of these two young ultra groups. It's like the Warriors, I think, or something like that. that'll give the division a degree of needle it doesn't have. There's not a lot of, particularly in League 1 and League 2, there's not a lot of rival teams, but this feels like a proper rivalry between them. Because if you remember back to Tom Tracy's LinkedIn post when he walked away from the club, he said he wanted to merge the two clubs and become the FC Edinburgh Spartans. And it certainly caused a lot of animosity between Edinburgh towards their former landlords. So it does have a particularly interesting degree of needle for it, and that's certainly adds a spice.
Yeah, it does.
Adds a spice. Adds a spice. Like,
but there is. It kind of feels like there is a kind of an unsavoury element just creeping in general, and maybe it's the top flight as well. But I do think in terms of the lower leagues, I think like Forfar have put out statements. You've had Edinburgh, Peterhead. You had like the young guy getting hammered at Wraith Rovers Dunfermline. I think he was like disabled.
Yeah, and they punished him by meeting Blair McInally.
And then punished him further by putting him on the players' bus for an away game. When they lost there, like, did they have to go back on the bus as well when everybody's miserable? But no, there is just this kind of element that's kind of creeping into the game that we could very much do without.
Yeah, I think so. Listen, enjoy your football. Oh, don't worry, I'm not finishing up the podcast here. Shaughan and I, we have got a lot to still to get through over the next 70 minutes. But I think it's unanimous bottom of the table.
Oh yes, by some margin, unfortunately.
We don't know what's coming up behind them. I'm going to presume East Kilbride and someone else, but are they going to be the first SPFL, first promoted side to be relegated out of the division?
I became Fife idiot in a group chat because I suggested them out, so I will stick with that.
Fair play to you, Shaughan. Fair play to you. We will move from the capital city and we will move to Morayshire to look at Elgin City. And for long parts, well, certainly the first half of the season, it looked like it was going to be doomed for Elgin, because they started the campaign under player-manager Ross Draper with a small, underwhelming squad. After a couple of months, Draper decided he didn't really fancy being a manager anymore, stepped down and was replaced by Barry Smith. However, he only lasted 2 months himself before departing due to work commitments. And then in November, Huntly manager Alan Hale was given the gig. And such was Hale's lack of profile that the club posted a photo of him and his assistant Stephen Laird on Twitter, and they had to put directions to point out who he actually was, and he subsequently became known as Alan Hale (left). Now, Hale eventually brought about a noticeable improvement in form, in results, in both results and in performance, and Elgin ultimately finished the campaign in 7th place. And I think they're coming into this campaign, there's a fair degree of stability. No directors have resigned after being told to stick their money up for their arse from a hacked email account. And I think it's going to be, well, it's going to be a more stable season. I don't necessarily think that's going to be stable, gets you into the top 4 kind of season.
Have you been listening to the podcast Bonnyrigg Beat?
Oh, no, I haven't. Is it worth listening to?
The new Elgin City podcast. There's only been 2 episodes.
Oh, man, I'm sorry. I missed that. It sounds quite interesting.
So everybody they've had on so far has been people who have been involved at the club. So I think it was the chairman was maybe in the first episode, a guy that kind of runs the kind of commercial activity for them in the second episode, and somebody else in the second one. There is a huge amount, based on those guests and the presenter, and I appreciate because they're involved at the club, they're not going to necessarily be downbeat, but taking them at face value, there seems to be a huge amount of positivity going into the season, and an expectation level that I did not expect.
Right, okay, you will need to unpack all that, Shaughan. Why is there such a high degree of optimism at Bonnyrigg?
So, in terms of the calibre of a player that they've brought in, there seems to be they're happy at the fact that they've brought in players from the Highland League, because what they've suggested is, certainly in recent years, because there is money in the Highland League, they said you can't afford to bring in players from that division. Now they seem to be in a situation where they can do that. And Alan Hale had said that last year there wasn't in terms of options off the bench, he didn't have it. He had a starting 11 and not much else. But they feel that there now is a higher caliber of subs bench, essentially. Again, no, I would tend to agree with you. I think that they might have improved incrementally. Maybe they do have a higher quality, higher caliber of squad. I still don't necessarily been good enough to break into the top 4.
Okay, well, I think that we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see, because I think a lot of the guys that they have signed, as you mentioned, they have come from the Highland League. And that's something that Alan Hale did very successfully when he took the job when he was finally able to sign his own players, he did sign boys from the Highland League, and they did noticeably improve when the season went on. But the guys he signed, like for instance Lewis Hyde, he's got a Wikipedia page. He he joined from Inverness Caledonian Thistle, but he'd had successful loan spells in the Highland League, and I think he's seen as going to be the midfield enforcer, someone who's just going to like sprint around the middle of the pitch, break up play, protect the defence. They also signed Ryan Sargent from Fraserburgh, Jack Murray from Buckie Thistle. Buckie Thistle are really going through their own transitional period after winning that league. So many players have departed there, but both are highly rated and both apparently will improve the options that they've already got there. So I'm keen to see how they get on. I always think that it's a funny one, like signing guys from the Highland League. There's obviously a lot of quality in that division, but I think it can be hit and miss. There's some guys who excel, same with the Lowland League as well, some guys who excel at the level but find it difficult to make the step up, and some people who find absolutely no bother. So hopefully Sargent and Murray and Hyde, I mean Hyde's played a couple of games for Cali Thistle, so he does have a degree of experience, but hopefully they can come and play in League 2 and do it with some degree of success.
And I think bringing back Dejon Golding permanently after a really impressive loan spell.
I was going
to for Cove.
I was going to save him for then. I was hoping we just talk through the list of players, but best of all is Dejon Golding. Brilliant signing, like a really, really good signing, really, really good piece of business. I mean, they took him on loan midway through from Cove Rangers, and midway through the season from Cove Rangers, and just brought about an enormous improvement in their front line. Now he's not going to score many goals. I think he only got 2 for the season, which I know that strikers aren't just judged on goals alone, but even so, not a fantastic return. But he will if you play the ball into him, he'll take the team 20 yards further up the park. No bother at all, because he likes fighting. He likes fighting with centre backs. He's strong, big shoulders, wants to back into people, wants to push into defenders, and just that willingness to put himself around is a massive boon to the team.
And I was delighted for him as well, because I think 12 months ago Golding had been on trial. I'm sure we discussed him. He'd been on trial at about 3 clubs.
Aye.
And he always seemed to be having a trial, like maybe it was at a championship team.
Yeah.
And every trial was with a club lower down the food chain.
Yeah.
He eventually found himself a deal at Cove. But I think almost immediately, I'm sure they loaned him to the Highland League.
I don't think they loan out to Highland League, but first of all,
then went back, and then he went to Elgin, and you just presumed, considering how many failed attempts at winning a deal, and even when he did win a deal, he was surplus to requirements. So he just clearly, patently is not good enough. And then he goes to Elgin and looks class.
Yeah.
And I actually wondered if Cove maybe could have used him in League 1. Obviously that's not the case. Maybe that's to do with Paul Hartley rather than Golding. But no, I was really chuffed for him.
Yeah, definitely. And on top of that as well, he won't just make the carry team forward, he'll be able to make the players behind him. So probably guys like David Dangana, Ollie McDonald, of course, best known for one of the best moments of last season when he scored that injury time winner for Stranraer against Clyde. Brian Martin's commentary like, Ollie, my son, you have won it for Stranraer. So hopefully Elgin City get to hear him chip in with something like that. But I think if there was a criticism of Golding, is that he doesn't score enough. He doesn't score enough. But I think that if you've got the guys that can chip in and do it, and you're facilitating it, then I think that's a huge sign. Sorry to see Big Bobby Jones wasn't kept on. He's moved on. Actually, he scored against Stennismuir last season. Absolutely mortifying.
They played his part.
It was embarrassing. It's like, oh my God. They've also signed Kyle Girvin from Stranraer. Now, Kyle Girvin I thought was all right when I saw him at Stranraer. Didn't necessarily stick out, but I can't think of anyone who's moved to such geographically opposing sides. Like, you've gone from the team that play the furthest south in Scotland to the most northerly team in Scotland.
Unless somebody's went from Stranraer to Wick.
Surely not me, but certainly in the league, in league football, in the league, there can't be anyone who has made such a... There can't be. Surely there can't be. There can't be. Off the top of my head, nobody's moved from Stranraer to Elgin. Well, if you do know anyone that's made any similar journeys, please do get in touch with myself and Shaughan and let us know. But we're talking a lot about the guys that have come into the club, and a lot of the guys who will perhaps give them degree confidence. There is still that smattering of quality around the place. You know, Matthew Cooper, very capable defender, long serving. Ross Draper, probably past his best a little bit, but can still play out from the back as well. The fact that he's a central midfielder, I always think that's very useful. And in front of him, like Russell Dingwall will provide a lot of legs in the middle of the park. I do think he'll link up quite well with Lewis Hyde. And then you've got like Brian Cameron, who at his best is one of the finest number 8s in the lower leagues. And unfortunately his best days don't come around quite as often as they used to. But when he's good, sometimes you see him and you just think, what on earth are you doing here? I make the comparison, he kind of reminds me of Frank Lampard. When he's on it, he reminds me of Frank Lampard. Why is it Frank Lampard? Funny, is it because
very much your go-to?
Is it because Gary Lineker made fun of his bald patch at the Euros? Is that why you're laughing?
That is your go-to, and it's just that somebody who has like had an extraordinary successful career, and you're comparing him to Brian Cameron.
I would need to check. I think Brian Cameron has made more appearances for Elgin City than Frank Lampard's made for Chelsea.
Fine.
There you go. So
that's settled my hash.
Yeah, so maybe think about that before you start making fun of Brian Cameron. There were points, remember, about 4 or 5 years ago, where you would see Cameron and be like, how on earth are you playing for Elgin? That's local, and he's got a good job outside football, so that's fair enough. I suppose if you're living in that area, you can only really sign for full-time teams in Inverness and Ross County.
I suppose one of the few examples where geographically it's been a benefit for them, I suppose.
Oh yeah, I suppose that you want to make the argument that maybe Elgin City should move their business operations down to Stirling so they can attract Kelty, so they can attract a higher calibre. Again, what are Caley Thistle thinking of there?
Sure.
I'm not sure as well.
Not thinking.
I do think as well that Alan Hale, for someone who, you'd a wee poked fun of at him because you'd never heard of him before, and the club didn't really go out their way to making it clear who he was. He has done really well, yes. And I think that he is a step up for the likes of Draper, who didn't really want the job, probably took it and then immediately regretted it. And then Barry Smith, who again probably took it and regretted it. But someone who, based up in the area, understands Highland League football and maybe understands like what fans want from clubs geographically. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn there and patronising people who stay up in the Highlands and stay in Morayshire or Banshire or whatever. But I just think that's... I've got my Central Belt bias hat on. Apparently, when we played Bucky Thistle, somebody was shouting the Central Belt cheats after Nicky Jameson went down for something like remarkable. But I do think it's a sort of different mindset there, and I think he understands that. And maybe that's the kind of guy that Inverness Kelly should be taking on as a manager.
But the fact that he could kind of take over a club that we at one point presumed that they would be finishing last place in League Two. And the fact they've been huckled at the Scottish Cup, 6-1 by Jeanfield Swifts.
God, I forgot about that,
So to go from that low to, so finishing 7th. To be fair, they weren't a million miles away from bottom place. Was it 4 or 5 points?
That was very tight, very tight at the bottom.
But regardless, he had a massive transformative effect on that Elgin team. So yes, I think they have a good manager in place and a decent enough squad. I'm not quite as positive about them as the Elgin fans on Bonnyrigg beat.
I just think he as well, because he came in after Ian McCall came in at Clyde, and there was Ian McCall's a much more high profile manager, so there's a lot more attention on what McCall's doing. But it felt as though that McCall was really huffing and puffing to try and get the best out of that team, and only really did it Clyde could have easily finished bottom. I remember at one point wanting Clyde to finish bottom because I thought they'd give East Kilbride a better game rather than Stranraer, and ultimately it all turned out fine. But nevertheless, the fact that he came in there and just quietly got on about his work and did a better job than Ian McCall did with far less money and far more challenging circumstances, that has to be applauded. So I think he could be Elgin City's strongest asset next season, and good luck to him, and I hope the club do well. I'm going for 6th.
Yes, I would say 5th or 6th, just outside the playoff.
I think they'll repeat last season. Right, we will move from Elgin and we will go to Angus for the third and final time in this very, very, this very lengthy podcast. What have we been talking for now? Nearly 7 hours? Not quite, 6 hours. 6 hours and we're not even there. My goodness. And we're going to Angus for the final time to talk about Forfar Athletic. Well, we predicted Forfar would challenge for the title last season, and as usual, we were absolutely incorrect. Just bear in mind that with any of these predictions, Shaughan and I are usually incorrect. That we were completely off the mark with that. And Mr. Raymond McKinnon, had shown promise after replacing Gary Irvine midway through the 2022-23 season, and we anticipated he would build on it. But it just felt as though they never got going at all last season. They were competitive, but never scored enough goals. Could never put a consistent run of results together. They won back-to-back games just once, and that was right at the end of the season. And the football was routinely quite difficult to watch. They finished in 6th place, but go back to the point you made about Elgin, that was just 4 points off the foot of the table. Now, I don't really like saying this, but of all the 30 teams I was researching, this is the one I'm most bored doing. I was like, it sounds bad, but I was like, see, like Peterhead, Elgin, Edinburgh, Annan, Arbroath and so on, happy to read about them, happy to watch the highlights, but Forfar, I was just like,
which, interestingly enough, is exactly how every single Forfar fan has felt about Forfar for the last season or two. And although we thought they would do well last season, we did caveat that with they were going to need reinforcements up top, because Josh Skelly, as much as he'd started last season's League Cup campaign, that was about it, and we didn't know if he had the kind of wherewithal to lead the line in the SPFL. Ultimately, he wasn't able to do it. And it feels like for the last couple of seasons now, they've tried, like, not a feeder club, but it's like they will contact
St Johnstone. She was like,
or Aberdeen, or Dundee. It's like, do you have any teenagers that we can? And
yes, lots.
Not even like guys that are on the periphery of the front, like below that. So this season they've done it with St Johnstone.
Yeah.
And maybe this season it'll work out. I have no idea, but it just feels like they have moved backwards as a club for whatever reason, presumably budgetary. But bear in mind they finished second in League One, like when Wraith were in the league. But it was Arbroath, Forfar, Wraith.
Right, good group of players there,
isn't it? Team is so far ahead of this current one, and yes, that might be that some of these young guys have brought in are talented. I know, is it Nathan Cannon? Cannon they've brought in from Alloa, seems to have started the season quite well. I believe from how they've started the League Cup campaign that tentatively supporters are a wee bit more encouraged by what they've seen in terms of it's a bit more exciting. It could barely be any less exciting compared to what they've seen recently. But again, I don't necessarily look at this team and think there's a top 4 team in the league.
You know, from having watched, complaining about Bonnyrigg style of football, for instance, and I don't know if it was new done this part, but when they would play against you and go long, there's always a degree of jeopardy with it. I just thought Forfar was just a complete lack of imagination, rather than, I mean, Bonnyrigg might be the same, but at least you felt tense. It's like at Station Park. Oh, there we go. There's Mark McCallum booting the ball as far as humanly possible from his hands. But it felt as though that McKinnon as a manager, like, had such promise at one point. I think when he was coming through at Brecon City, like I'm sure that when he was given the gig there, was one of the top performing candidates when he was doing his licences with the Scottish FA, and seeing his teams fluctuate through that division, generally playing really exciting football, we thought this guy's got a really good chance. But since then, it's just been a series of.
I liked him at Wraith. I thought he.
I was going to say that it's been a series of some periods have been pretty good.
Queen's Park, I suppose, won the league, but with
Queen's
resources
Park,
that he absolutely should be winning the league with.
Aye, definitely. I mean, at least Queen's Park were quite good fun to watch that season as well. I mean, I remember like Jai Katongo playing for them, just like miles ahead, like an adult taking, like a father taking part in like a kiddie sports day, and just like steamrolling past everyone. But it's never this McKinnon's team. As we said at the start there, when he replaced Irvine, you think, well, they look as though they could really go and kick on and do something, and that just hasn't happened. And the signings that he's made in the summer, you know something, man, there's not. That's what I meant about getting excited. Like, every other team has signed someone that I can be like, I can see what they did. Like, even Edinburgh, for instance, who have been given a hard time, even like signing guys like John Robertson, I'll be like, that's a player that gives me hope because he will bring something to this team. Maybe I'm trying, like, because I quite like Blair Malcolm. That's about it.
Actually paying money for Ross McLean.
Like, McLean's a decent player, right? McLean's a decent player. Probably you'd bracket him as a striker. He plays a striker / winger, forward. That's what you describe him as, a forward. But he'd been out of the game since January. like basically Dumbarton put a statement on their website saying that he's effectively on sabbatical, or he's like on unpaid leave from us because of work commitments. He'll no longer be able to play for us, and presumably the work commitments have finished. But I don't understand why you'd pay a fee for him. Go to like
they'd just be happy to
Stevie Farrell and just say, listen, can you go and get a termination of your contract and we'll sign for him. So I don't think he's the sort of player you'd spend money on. But he can be a good player. Like, he is quick off the mark, he is quite tricky, and on his day he can be devastating. There was a game last season, Dumbarton beat Stennismuir 4-2, and for a period him and James Hilton were just untouchable coming in from the flanks. But it's an expression, on his day, is something that, particularly further down in the SPFL, you go, on their day really fluctuates, because if everyone played to their very best, Ross McLean would be playing for PSG,
I mean, this is like a really, it is barely a positive, but I suppose the one thing that I don't think they're going to have to worry about this season is, and they did for a while last term, in terms of getting sucked in at the bottom of the league. Yeah. Like, they aren't going to have that trouble. I'd be astonished if they have that trouble. But I just think it'll be a dull season. Maybe they'll play better football, and that might be enough, because that would be a step forward from last season. And if they're even in the equation for top 4, then again, that'll be a step forward. And maybe they can. But you're right, I don't see very much from the signings to suggest that might be the case.
We'll break the team down, and they've got a very good goalkeeper, Mark McCallum. That is someone, it's good. Having been in that position where you've just got a long-standing goalkeeper who is there with you for seasons. It's just a good feeling to have that. It's a position that you don't need to worry about. When you're worrying about your goalkeeper, that can be devastating right across the team. Yep. If you've got a good goalkeeper, fine. And that's what Mark McCallum's been at Forfar. Just someone who they can completely rely on. I might be saying he's not the most mobile. He's perhaps a bit heavier than
every time he comes back. There is a man who's enjoyed his summer.
Aye, so did Aiden Hazard. He enjoyed his summers when he was away. It never did him any harm. But like, for fundamental, when it comes to like balls into the box and so on, like, very rarely Mark McCallum's going to like chuck a cross in or anything like that. And he can sometimes, some of the saves he pulls off is like, how on earth did you manage that? Very good goalkeeper. And I think that Matty Allen's a decent centre back that they got from Montrose a couple of years ago. Good in both boxes, 5 goals last season. Their best player is Stuart Morrison.
Yep.
Like, can be used as central defender, but laterally was used in the middle of the park. I think, given Forfar's perhaps like lack of quality, you want to see him stay in the middle where he can impose himself in games rather than just keep other teams at bay. But good option to have.
They still have Mark Whatley, who
yes.
didn't like. I thought that was going to be like a really, really good signing. It hasn't really worked so far, but he's still there. Again, if they can get a good season out of him, he makes a difference.
Yeah, definitely. Same with Finn Robson as well. I think that he's somebody that's been cutting around at Forfar for a while. So you do want to see these guys kick on a wee bit. Blair Malcolm, a player I've always quite liked, and that's actually now a signing that, I quite like Blair Malcolm. I don't know if he sticks out more because of his ponytail than anything else, but always
helps.
It certainly helps. But I always think he makes a positive contribution whenever he plays. He can play in the middle of the park, can play at fullback, and I think he's very hard working, can cover a lot of ground, and probably just at his best, just simple stuff, just stopping the other teams getting close by. Maybe he might be the replacement for Morrison and allow him to drop back. But I think he can just break up play and give the ball to the better players. The areas that I'm a wee bit worried in, like Ross McLean, as we mentioned, they're probably going to be played up front as a striker. I'm not sure you can really count on him for goals. I'm not sure you can count on Josh Skelly or Russell McLean for goals either.
Or Aaron Cox.
Darren Cox is the boy that's come from St Johnstone.
Yes. Yeah, they're very much light in that area. And I just feel like we have essentially said exactly the same this time around. Well, no, because we were more complimentary about Forfar, but I think we were fooled by how well they done in that league.
I think so.
Section.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was points when we were talking about Josh Skelly and just like how good he did, and it's like, I think
he was excellent.
He was. I can't remember who it was they played. They beat someone 2-0, and he scored a goal and he had to make it himself. Pretty much, he got the ball played into him, he held it up and turned.
Arbroath.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. It was Arbroath. And it just never happened for him. And then I think the longer he goes on without scoring, the more his confidence takes a hit. And actually thought I was actually surprised he was still there. To be honest, I thought he might have gone back to, I think it was Lucky or someone they signed from
Dundee North End,
something like that, one of the teams in Dundee Juniors. And there's no shame in that. Nope. There's no shame in that. But hopefully, with a season under his belt, he knows the division, he knows what to expect. He knows what to expect from himself. Might get a better calibre of performance from him. And of course, Russell McLean as well.
The wild card.
The Maverick.
Don't see them trouble in the top 4. Mid-table again. I think enough to keep them away from the rubbish at the bottom, but nowhere near enough to get in that top 4.
I think McLean can get 15 goals. He got 7 last season.
You've lost the run of yourself because it's now hour 8.
Is it? Sorry, this is me. I'm obviously getting fried. Too much podcast recording. But no, it's like if he's got the fire in his belly, if he fancies it, then he can be a big asset. It's just unfortunately that when he doesn't, he starts doing that thing where he tries to play wee flicks and all that, and looks for fouls that he's never going to get. He's so frustrating player. But who knows? Who knows? I think it's for McKinnon. Just try and re-establish. You've proven yourself to be a good manager in the past. You've got good players, or some good players that you can work with there. Some good young players coming in from St Johnstone. Aaron Cox.
He's never recovered from not being Duncan Ferguson's assistant manager at Forest Green.
You've got a long way to work. Maybe that's him and Ferguson would have worked so well together because they both want to play the same kind of football. Maybe that's something. I don't know. But we'll head up the east coast and we'll head all the way to Peterhead. The Blue Toon, I think, generally performed above certainly our expectations last season, because if you remember when they had that very embarrassing relegation and huge turnover of players, we said 12 months ago that consolidation was vital. The club should look to keep their SPFL status and try and get a nice mid-table finish. Instead, they challenged for promotion. Finished in second place, but thrashed by Spartans in the playoff semi-finals, going down 7-2 on aggregate. Small turnover in players. 2 very important players have moved on elsewhere, but I think they've been replaced quite well.
Yes, but not in terms of quality. I don't think like for like.
Well, let's get into it then, Shaughan. Right, how do you think Peterhead will get on this season?
I think they are incrementally poorer than last season.
Okay.
And I thought they'd done very well to finish in second place. I don't see that happening again, but I do see them challenging for a top 4 position.
I think they'll get into the top 4 as well. I think there's enough to like about this team, and I think that the business that they've done is pretty good. I think they've made I think everyone's got to be qualified by saying, like, outside of the players Clyde have signed, I think they've made one of the best signings in League 2.
And who's that?
That's Dylan Forrest, who they brought in from Stranraer. I thought he was excellent with Stranraer last season. I'd like to have seen him go to Steny, to be honest, but obviously Peterhead can offer him more than what we can, or maybe we were never in for him in the first place. But a player who I thought had a little bit of everything. He was really a lot of dig, good passer, creative. I think he's a good replacement for Hamish Ritchie. He'll be a big loss, but I think they've brought someone in that can do similar things. One of the else things I liked about Forest as well, see, any time there was needle in a game, particularly you think about the games we spoke about, the games where Stranraer played Clyde, the games against East Kilbride at the end of the season, any time there was bother where like players were squaring up to one another, Forrest was writing about it. He was right about it. Anyone that started on any of his mates, he was right in there about it to sort it out. I really like that about him.
And that's yes, that is the kind of thing you need. So I agree with you. Dylan Forrest is a very, very good signing. I don't know if they have anybody that is good enough to adequately replace Conor O'Keefe. Like, I was really impressed with him last season.
Conor O'Keefe is a really good player. Yeah, Conor O'Keefe's a really good player. Like his dribbling ability, really, really strong dribbler, strong runner as well, and quite a good ball into the box as well.
Did he go to Australia?
Yes, no, you're right. Yeah, he's gone to Australia. I've no idea if he's still playing football. This is the nation Australia, not the soccer team FC Australia. Just to be clear on that, in case anyone's confused. Kieran Dunn, I think he could be a really useful signing for them. he has had some terrible injury issues. When he left Cove Rangers in 2023, he had to spend all of last year recuperating from a shoulder issue that he had. It was very debilitating. But he could be a strong option on the left-hand side of the midfield. And on top of that as well, he can play in more positions, or certainly he can play anywhere down the left. I think Conor O'Keefe could play anywhere across the front. But I do think he'll give them something that O'Keefe, he'll give them something in O'Keefe's absence.
In terms of other players I brought in, like Ben Armour, like a player who...
He's fine.
But probably won't score goals.
No.
Even though he is literally your forward who was going to lead the line. He has other attributes, I get that. He'll try hard. He might work the defence that he's up against, but he's not going to score goals.
He'll score 6 goals for the season, because a lot of that will still...
In all competitions.
In all competitions, yes. If I was bringing Ben Armour, I wouldn't necessarily be excited. I think you know now what you're going to get from Ben Armour, and that is you're going to get a lot of hard work from him. And again, there's no shame in that, because as we've seen at the Euros with Portugal with Cristiano Ronaldo, if you've got a centre forward that doesn't run, the whole team is going to suffer from that. If Roberto Martinez had found out that Ben Armour had some Portuguese blood in him, he should have put him on the plane.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that.
Exactly. Thank you. And on top of that as well, they've got one of the best lower league strikers of all time in their books, and Rory McAllister, a year older, perhaps a little slower, but
is his time coming to an end, or do you still think he will have a successful campaign?
Double figures. I'll go for Rory McAllister to get double figures.
I think they'll need to get double figures on him, because if they don't get that, then I don't see them. Yeah, maybe still getting the top 4, but to be comfortable in top 4, they need him, I think, to be on form.
Of course, they've got Kieran Shanks, but I know he's out at the moment with a damaged collarbone. I think he hurt himself in the defeat to Queen's Park. So I think it'll be McAllister and Armour up front for the time being. But just every time talking about Rory McAllister, it's just always like one of the best lower league strikers of all time. Just what a career. Honestly, what a career. Just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He's a sort of guy, he's like, when you're playing against him and he does this stuff where he goes down looking fouls and the referee gives it and everyone gets fed up and he just gets up with a big sort of cheeky grin on his face. He's known for all these about like 14 dumplings are shouting at him and he's just got this wee grin where he knows he's done you. Love it. Love this sort of stuff, man. I think as well that they've signed, speaking of, we've mentioned about Elgin City being able to pick the bones of Bucky Thistle. Max Barry is coming. I think he'll give the midfield a bit of bite, and I think similar to Jack Murray, I think he was one of the best players in the Highland League last season. Well, obviously his team won the league title. And on top of that as well, for the new guys that are coming, they do still have that strong spine. Like Stuart McKenzie, accomplished goalkeeper, Scott Ross and Jason Brown, meat and potatoes centre-backs, absolutely need. Andy McCarthy is a good football player. I think Peter Pollitt began to acclimatise to life in part-time football, showed real flashes of quality last season after a period out. So there is elements of that team that make sense to me.
There hasn't been a big churn, and they finished second last year, so there was absolutely no reason that they won't have a good campaign. I just don't think it'll be quite at that level.
Okay, that's fine. And to say about Connor Duffy being back, having missed all of last season through injury, I feel as though you say something quite definitive, and I want to come back in here and talk about this player that I've made
That's
notes
because
about.
you know a wee bit more about them, so that's absolutely fine.
That's good. Aye. He missed all of last season through injury. I mean, he joined the club from Clyde, played against him on the opening day of the season, and then just like knackered himself and couldn't play again. He's had terrible luck with injuries, off-field issues, but great if he can get like a season under his belt, because see, when he's dribbling, he's a great ball carrier. Mm-hmm. It's like watching Vinicius Jr. However, imagine if you were getting the ball played out and it was Mark McCallum putting crosses in. He crosses the ball like Mark McCallum. Just a real lack of finesse. It's like he would play if he could put in a good cross. He'd be playing much higher up the food chain. Just sometimes he can be a bit wayward with his final ball.
You can't be great at everything.
No, you can't. I think there's a good 11 here, a strong 11, and I think it might be the best in League 2 outside of Clyde and the Spartans.
Okay. Does that mean you have them as third?
I've got them as third, aye. Potentially outstanding midfield as well, like with Forrest, McCarthy and Barry there.
I'll go fourth.
Fourth, okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I was just taking a sip of water there. Now, we will move to the home of the future National Stadium, and that is Stirling, to talk about Stirling Albion. And I really don't think that many people would have expected Stirling Albion to be as big a disappointment as they were last season. I mean, they won promotion to League One as champions, and the campaign started very well. They got through the League Cup group stages, but that was about as good as it got for the Beanos. Their form really began to flatline from about October onwards, and they began falling down the table. Unfortunately for them, Athletic were beginning to spark to life over the latter part of the season, and then the teams would eventually swap places in the final stretch. Stirling would finish in 9th, and they were relegated into the playoff semi-final by Dumbarton. Now, over the summer, for all 30 teams, I've been keeping notes of all their comings and goings. So when it comes to actually pulling together final notes, this happened at Dumbarton, this happened at Inverness Caledonian Thistle. I'd completely forgotten about this happening until I actually read back my notes. So Stirling Albion, I think a couple of days after they were relegated, they sacked Darren Young, and his backroom his backroom staff followed, and the medical team followed. I think that's pretty unheard of. And this was despite the fact that Young had signed a new contract in January that would take him up to the end of the 2026 season. And Darren Young was replaced by Chris Aitken. Now, Chris Aitken is a very popular character from his playing days at Fourth Bank, but his managerial career hadn't quite been as successful. He'd relegated Kilwinning Rangers from the West of Scotland Premier Division and then finished 7th the following season. Of course, when you sack a manager like Darren Young and replace him with someone like Chris Aitken, fans aren't necessarily going to be happy about it, and they let the board know their feelings. The board then changed their mind, withdrew Aitken's contract offer, and apparently Aitken had resigned from Kilwinning to take charge of Stirling Albion before the contracts. He was left in limbo. And then Alan Maybury was eventually appointed the manager at the beginning of the June. He's had to deal with a large turnover of players, many of whom had left before he'd got in the role. There's some players that were signed before he had come in. And I think there's long-serving players like Jordan McGregor, Jack Leach, Kyle Banner, Paul McLean have moved on. So it feels like, I think this is a very transitional season for Stirling Albion.
And it also, it just felt like everything was, it felt like nobody was really in charge at the end of last season and the beginning of the summer. Even just basic things like, see the players that you have mentioned that were moving on?
Yeah.
The club was never announcing it. The fans were finding this out from
other teams when they join.
Or their social media accounts, for example.
I'm sure it's realising that Paul McLean had gone when Cowden Beath announced them as their new manager. It's like, how did that happen?
But then I think when they eventually started to communicate, it sounded like that they had very much maybe overreached in terms of their budget from last season, which felt a wee bit unexpected. It didn't feel like a squad that Stirling Albion ultimately couldn't afford. But it seemed that was the case, and it still led to their relegation. So it very much now feels like they have had to cut their cloth accordingly, and there's a huge number of players that have come from clubs out with the SPFL or young players on loan. So I definitely don't see Stirling Albion as being somebody that's going to bounce back.
No, I'm the same. I was initially, the first signing that they made was Derek Gaston, and you think, fuck, that's a really, really good signing. But this was during. So this is nothing against Gaston. I think Gaston's a phenomenal goalkeeper, and I think he'll do a really, really good job for Stirling Albion. But they signed him when they didn't have a manager, and there was a rumour, and this is just street talk, there was a rumour that Stirling Albion had tried to poach Dick Campbell from East Fife. And so when they approached Gaston, they said, come in, we're going to get Dick Campbell as manager. So Gaston signed the contract, and it turns out Dick Campbell says, no, I'm staying at East Fife. That might be absolutely shite. It probably is absolutely shite. Because it's too far-fetched. It's absolutely too far-fetched for it to be true. So maybe that's why I say it's street talk. I want that to be qualified for the street talk. Nevertheless, Gaston's an excellent goalkeeper. I think he is venerated from his time. Arbroath probably go down as a bit of a club legend there as well. And I think he's an upgrade on Blair Curry and Mark Weir, who both left the club in the summer. So he'll be a really good signing.
And there's probably still enough about that squad, and that if those signings that we don't know too much about, if there is a wee bit of quality there, then there probably is enough around that team in terms of, so still with Dale Carrick, Dale Hilson will be absolutely fine at League Two. Callum Crane, I think, is a decent, wherever he plays, whether it's midfield or the fullback position. Eric Sula,
I think he's a decent signing, yeah.
Decent centre half. I watched him against Wraith in the League Cup, the first game in the group section. The wee guy on loan that played wide, Harry Wright, on loan from Hibs, seemed to have a wee bit about him.
Cool.
So they might have just enough to maybe challenge for the top four. But no, I think this very much feels like as you say, a transitional season for them.
Aye, the squad feels like a real half and half squad. It feels like you've got some older, experienced players who are good players that have had success elsewhere and kind of success at Stirling Albion, and then guys that have just really just come out of nowhere, like young boys who are like 19, 20 to bulk up the team. So it really feels like if there's any injuries to one of these experienced players, then it's going to be somebody who's like 18 or 19 that's going to come in and supplement them.
But they did have Ali Roy to carry them through the League Cup. A player who just loves the League Cup group section.
Oh, loves it. Loves it. But don't tell him
what's going on in the group chat.
That's it. Don't tell his dad what's going on in the group chat. That was it. I always remember that shit with Ali Roy. We'll go the team back to front then, because I thought when they won promotion to League One, the array of forwards they had, when they had Hilson, Carrick, they had Robert Thompson, they had Greg Spence, I thought that is just such an array of forwards. This team is going to score goals. But ultimately, they scored like just 39 goals. That's the second lowest in the league. I mean, Edinburgh City got 36 by comparison, and they were losing most weeks. So I think a lot more is expected from Carrick and Hilson.
I suppose what they didn't have was, I wondered if they could have held on to Robert Thompson, because he's somebody who kind of linked everything.
Nah, I think Robert Thompson's best days are behind him.
But even a kind of Robert Thompson-esque forward who is up to the rigours of League One. I get what you mean.
Every single club would love
but Thompson was important in that
I think
winning.
Aye, but I think he found the going in League One too hard for him. I don't think he's moved to East Kilbride there. He doesn't play very often there. I think that move up was just perhaps at a level too far. And no harm to Robert Thompson, because he's a player that I really liked. But with Carrick and Hilson, I think that Carrick had done so well at League Two. I mean, he was the player, I think he was the PFA Player of the Year for League Two that season. And just, I think he always tried hard, but it just never really got going for him. And Hilson, I think that perhaps moving, was it Arbroath that he signed from? He was never particularly prolific at Arbroath, and just because you're not prolific at one level, if you drop down, you're suddenly going to score a glut of goals. I think similar to Ben Armour, so someone who does his best work by just working hard and pressing, and I think that's why he was a useful player for Dick Campbell to keep around at Arbroath. But I think that he was probably expected to fulfil a role or hit targets that he just wasn't going to get, and so I think for him, it's really just about like working hard to supplement Carrick and Roy, because he is. I quite like Hilson, but if you take it the caveat, he's probably not going to score very many goals for you. And then further back, Callum Crane impressed in flashes after moving to Edinburgh. From Edinburgh, beg your pardon. They've got boy Ricky Waugh, who's coming on loan from Queen's Park. He is apparently a very handy player. Captain Queen's Park's B team, very mature figure, and there's the hope from the Spiders that he'll develop, return to the south side, and then slot into the first team. So there's a lot riding on him.
Big talk.
That is big talk. That is big talk. But that's what you want. That's ultimately what you want. And I think early impressions have been quite good. They say just like the way he commands himself in the pitch, the way he carries himself, the way he like talks to older and experienced players. Like, oh, you bodgers, give me the fucking ball. Stuff like that.
That just sounds rude.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, it does, but he does it with a wee grin on his face, like Rory McAllister winning a foul, just does it with a wee grin. And in midfield as well, like Lewis Milne came badly off form. I think that again, if I'm having joined from Montrose, I think that there was a degree of expectation from him because he had the know-how in that division. Didn't really see enough of him. And Ross Davidson, who had missed pretty much most of last season, if not all of last season through injury. I know he's a player that Darren Young absolutely adored because he signed him for Albion Rovers, signed him for Stirling Albion. And if he's fit, he's really good, a really good ball-winning defence screening midfielder. Just he was unfit, and the team just didn't have anyone in that mould that could come in and replace him. And then at the back, sorry to keep on talking here, just at the back you've got Ross McGuigan, who I think is better used at centre-back than he is at right-back. I think when Craig Fowler did a bonus podcast with Graham Ruthven, Graham spoke about Stirling's back four as effectively like 4 centre-backs, and because of that it really inhibits you going forward, and I think McGuigan is far better utilised in the middle, although I think Stirling Albion might be playing a 3-5-2 for the season ahead.
And they brought in, is it Bailey Dahl or Bailey Dahl that's been playing on the left from Hearts on loan?
I'll take your word for it. You're nodding away there. I'll take your word for it.
You'll just have to.
And I think what Maybury wants to do as well is just be quite progressive and have them playing out from the back. I think that's where a guy like Sula will come in well, because he is quite handy on the ball, certainly like compared to McGeeky. And they have one of the best surfaces in the lower leagues. It's like the anti-Dumbarton, the anti-rock. It's a beautiful surface as well. It's consistently a beautiful surface. It's generally good all year round.
Although
so
Audley had a massive hole in it at that Raith Rovers.
So he did. Derek Gasson had to.
Strange. Basically, the game was paused for about 5 minutes while the referee waited on somebody to fill the hole. Nobody was coming.
Then Gasson was like, "Fuck, I'll just do this."
I mean, there was literally like a massive pile of sand, like 40 yards to his right. So he just went and kind of filled it himself. I thought Stirling Albion done okay against Raith. Didn't really do very much going forward.
Yeah.
Didn't really cut Raith open at any points. However, Raith didn't really create a plethora of chances. Like they
Was that because Stirling inhibited them?
to a degree, like Gassamay had like one decent save, and other than that Raith game, I mean, they had a decent draw against Hamilton. They were 2 up against Stranraer. So it kind of ended up picking them back. So probably they've done maybe even more than you would expect in terms of this League Cup group stage. So maybe I've been a wee bit harsh on them.
No, I think you're right. I think they have done better than expected, because I'm fully expecting like a mid-table finish. It depends if there's more players that can come in to augment the squad, because if you say there, I think that starting 11 is good, but you take away 2 players, a suspension or an injury, then you're asking somebody like really young to try and fill in, and I just don't think, you never know, these guys could be absolutely outstanding. They probably won't be. So that's why I'm expecting like a mid-table finish for them. And there's nothing wrong with that, man. There's nothing wrong with that.
I'd 5th, I think, is where they'll finish.
Okay. Your new website's very nice.
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
Take a look at that.
Fair play.
Now, let's go to the capital. This is team 29 of 30. We're getting through there, Shaughan. We're getting there. We're getting there, nearly. Team 29 of 30. It is 29 of 30, because it's Stranraer next, right? Thank God. Thank God. Thank God. Oh, dear. Honestly.
You actually sounded like the Stranraer commentator there.
Oh, I was going to do an impression of them, but no, there is only one Brian Martin. Don't worry, Brian, we're coming out eventually, hours later, we're finally coming to talk about your team. This is the amount of work that's gone into this, so that this podcast is just insane from the pair of us.
But it's all there. It's all there for everybody to hear.
It's all there for everyone to hear. I'd hate to think if we've made one mistake at Airdrie. That's what I'm terrified of.
Switching off.
There's one mistake.
So, we haven't said Airdrie United or anything, have we?
We have now. They've made it this far. Oh, this is going off. This is going off. But we're going to the capital city for Edinburgh's 3rd favourite team. This is the Spartans. And on the whole, the Spartans' maiden season in the SPFL was excellent. Dougie Samuel's team played some eye-catching football, but it was also successful as well. The team finished in 3rd place. They made it all the way to the playoff final, but they were narrowly defeated by Dumbarton. And I think they come into this new season hopefully being able to repeat it. I certainly don't think it's out with the realms of possibility. And on top of that, they had an outstanding League Cup campaign. 3 wins out of 4, finished top of their group, and that was ahead of Livingston, Dunfermline Athletic and Cove Rangers, 3 full-time sides. Minimal turnover of players. I'm expecting more of the same.
I think they might actually be better. I think the squad might be better than the one that done so well last season. I think the
explain yourself.
I think the loss of Rhys Armstrong will be felt, but in terms of who they've brought in,
yeah,
like you're right, there has been a massive turnover. Like Callum Booth, like was on loan last season, done really well, managed to secure him permanently. I think Brogan Walls, I was maybe a wee bit surprised.
I think a lot of people were,
and I think most people thought East Fife fans were hopefully would sign on, and if he didn't, then he would go somebody in League One, for example.
I think his agency might be Concilium Sports.
Well, then this is a stopping point until he gets to Airdrie. But again, that is a good signing, and I think Hamish Ritchie from
Really good signing.
Peterhead is another very, very good signing.
He just moved job. I think that's what it was, that he or his girlfriend or something moved job, and he's followed down to Edinburgh, so that's why he was no longer able to play for Peterhead. But smashing signing, big, strong player, good runner. Like, again, a player can do a bit of everything as well. Perhaps better used further forward. I think he'll be a massive boon to Spartans, especially Reece Armstrong moving on. I think, as we said right back at the start when we were talking about Airdrie, I think he was very impressive in his first season in League Two, and I don't think I'm trying to think if there's any major departures beyond that. The only other one I was thinking about, you're making a wee face, I think Mark McNulty.
Aye, but he didn't really do too much in his time there.
You know, I was when I was thinking about Mark McNulty's time at the Spartans went exactly as I thought it would, where you could tell, like, in terms of touch and intelligence, miles ahead of everyone else around him, but just didn't really have the fire in the belly and couldn't last 90 minutes.
So I remember when he signed it, right, this is going to go one of two ways. He's either going to come here, rediscover a fire in his belly or a bit of verve, and he might kick on and move up the leagues, or he will just disappear. Maybe go back to America or whatever and play at the second or third tier. And it was interesting when I got to the playoffs and you watched the game against Dumbarton, and you had him lining up for Spartans, and you had Michael Ruth playing for Dumbarton. You're like, right, the forward that's on this park, who is going to be kind of upwardly mobile, and from here on in is very much going to be Ruth rather than McNulty.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, McNulty is, as far as I'm aware, he has been training with the club, but he's looking for a move elsewhere. So he might be back at Spartans if nothing else materialises. But he's
not old. What is he? Maybe only 30.
He's not particularly old as well. But I think if he was to come back, I think he could make a huge difference. And his time wasn't like, trying to think of a player that comes into a team and immediately scores goals. Can't think of anyone off the top of my head.
I don't think he was necessarily bad.
No, he wasn't bad. But I think that there are people who, and I'm not to make myself sound like I know better than you. People who will just see that signing on paper and be like, "That's an amazing signing. What's Martin McNulty doing there?" And then you chip away at it, the fact that I didn't play much in the United States. His father-in-law is the manager of the Spartans. It makes more sense than you actually see him in action and you see all the stuff that he's good at, but then you see the parts of why he is playing at that level. But if he does come back, then who knows, he'd be a huge asset for them. The other good player they signed as well, just to complete that, Lewis Hunter, coming from Annan Athletic, perhaps not the most heralded of names, but perhaps give him a bit more steel, a bit more solidity in the middle of the park, and perhaps a bit more cynicism. Because I think that's perhaps something that the Spartans lacked at times last season. Perhaps a bit nice.
And he will supplement a midfield that has names. So I find Spartans quite an interesting team. And at the start of last season, the majority of players, we weren't entirely sure. They'd won the Lowland League.
Yeah, you're familiar with some of them, yeah.
You're like, right, well, how are they going to acclimatise? Because they hadn't really brought in too many players that had SPFL experience. Maybe 2 or 3 signings last summer. Over the course of last season, suddenly they were bringing in like James Cragen, for example, who has a name, Paul Watson, that was playing like centre-half. But there was players that we were learning that were pretty good, like Jamie Dishington, for example.
Yeah.
I think he is a good player.
He's always, like, in the Lowland League, I think his name was all, it's like it's quite an unusual name. And I think he always quite stood out and was quite well thought of.
But you're right, maybe there was a kind of nasty element that they were lacking, and maybe he can add to that.
Definitely. They've also kept a hold of probably maybe behind Armstrong, their best player last season, Cammy Russell. I was surprised actually he didn't move elsewhere over the summer, but I was also surprised to learn he's 26, a bit older than I thought he was. I thought he was only about 22, 23, but then I realised that he'd been at Airdrie, been at East Kilbride, been at the Spartans for a couple of years. So but scored 2 goals at Cove Rangers in the League Cup, and one was an absolute stunning effort from the edge there. I mean, kind of make out what's going on in the fog, but a really, really well taken goal. And he got 12 goals for them last season. I didn't realise I didn't appreciate it was as much as that. But if you can keep him fit, keep him firing, then that's a really important player.
And continue to get Blair Henderson to score a ridiculous amount of goals for somebody who, he never seems the most popular or most highly regarded player, and yet he was the top goal scorer in League 2 last season.
27 goals in 44 appearances last season.
Incredible.
Like, that is incredible because you cannot argue with those numbers. You can't argue with the numbers. And it's not to say that, but some of them are penalties, because penalties, of course, famously.
Frank Lampard used to score penalties.
Yeah, I'd love to go 5 minutes without talking about fucking Frank Lampard. But he scores a lot of goals. I mean, it's a better return than one or two. And as you say, there's no other striker in the division that could match that. You can't argue with the numbers, so I'm going to do it anyway. And it felt a lot of the time, it felt there's sometimes he can be a bit static and a wee bit immobile, and I think he can sometimes be easy to defend against if you've got he's up against big guys that like to header the ball as well and don't mind the fight.
How many goals did he score?
27 and 44.
Doesn't sound like it's that easy to defend against.
I know, that's the point I'm making. I don't understand it. I don't understand what I'm saying here. I don't understand it. I think he can sometimes be frustrating to watch. However, you simply cannot argue with those numbers. He is a very accomplished goal scorer at this level. And there's between the pair of them, that's nearly 40 goals between Henderson and Cammy Russell off the two players. That's a remarkable return.
Because I remember we spoke about them on the TV show when they were coming up, or maybe they were just about to seal the Lowland League. And like any time we're talking about somebody from the Lowland League or the High League, it's like, geez, don't really know anybody here. And when we kind of, can't remember if it was just like reading up on them or whatever, and it looked like that although we knew Blair Henderson, he wasn't the most important player. It was Cammy Russell or Dishington or whoever. So I had reservations about him when he was coming back into the SPFL. You're right, you cannot argue against it.
Yeah, no, you can't argue, and I've no doubt that he'll continue to play an important role. And on top of that, if Cammy Russell's older than I expected, Blair Henderson's only about 29. So is Blair Carswell, actually. He's only 29. He kind of looks like Hasbulla if he was a fully grown adult. But again, he has proven himself to be a good goalkeeper. Was it the Pilton Shilton? Is that what they call him? It's an absolutely superb nickname. And I think that when we were talking about Blair Henderson, Blair Carswell, that defence as well, that is a pretty handy looking defence that they've got in front of him, because you've got Callum Booth, who's joined on a full-time basis from the Johnson, as you mentioned, Paul Watson, Ayrton Sonker, very strong centre backs. No, perhaps like if they're caught in the turn, they can be caught out there. But if the game's him, like Ayrton Sonker, honestly, I'm just looking at Craig Fowler's fridge freezer there, and I'm just imagining it in comparison in size to Ayrton Sonker. He is a strapping big boy.
Presumably Ayrton Sonker has never had 47 carrier bags on his head, unlike Fowler's fridge freezer.
No, that's what he does to strengthen his neck muscles. He just put more and more carrier bags on top of his head until shopping until he says no more. So I think that the Spartans, on top of that, sorry, just before we conclude, there's one player that we haven't mentioned.
I'm trying to think who we have missed out here. Danny Denham,
yes.
Our good friend Danny Denham.
Our friend and associate Danny Denham, who is likely to be understudy to Callum Booth this year.
No shame in that.
There's no shame in that. I think he'll have a role to play. Perhaps not quite as explosive as he once was, but there's just a very, very fit boy, very professional, very experienced, and just a very good guy to have around the place.
A nice guy to have in the dressing room.
And he stays locally as well, so you can cut down travel expenses.
He's cheap.
He's cheap. But no, it's he'll have an important part to play this season. I think that he was mostly used as a substitute. But if the manager trusts you that you can come on and do a good job, then fair play to him. So I hope that Danny has a really, really good season ahead. I think Spartans will do well. I know that you don't want to read too much into the League Cup group stages. You don't want to get carried away by them. You don't want to get too despondent about them. But brilliant League Cup group stage. Really impressive on a special up at Cove Rangers. Really good season last year. You've kept a hold. There's like two players who you'd want to have kept hold of, Armstrong and McNulty, and there's no guarantee that McNulty won't be back anyway. I would fancy them to finish second.
Finish second and have an excellent chance of getting promoted.
I think so.
I have them.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, good luck to them. Good luck to them. I think they have. They've done well since they've come into the SPFL. I know some fans might not necessarily like that because I was trying to think maybe because of social media, but I've not really seen much of their social media. I think it's...
We were a bit down on them when they came into the...
I made a mistake. I remember when they relegated Albion Rovers, putting a tweet out saying, like, lamenting that, I'm gutted that Albion Rovers left. I don't think that Spartans will add much. Got that wrong.
Yes.
Got that completely wrong. That was actually, on my part, very disrespectful towards the club. I do think that in every single team that has come up has added something different to the SPFL. Some teams have added a lot, some teams have added a tiny wee bit, but every team has added something, and that's including the Spartans. I'm sure they're quite well back though, the Spartans, am I right in saying?
So
Must be.
Well, they must be, because let's face it, they have a number of players who are names, who have had decent careers in the SPFL, who I am surprised that they can afford. So that I would presume that they have some kind of external backing to... I mean, they have an okay support, but not one that I would imagine is good enough to bring in what now is like a reasonably experienced squad for that level. Yeah,
definitely. Just outside Clyde, I think, and maybe just above Peterhead. I think that's the best team
very much
in League Two. Finally, Shaughan,
30 or 30.
We have reached the finishing line. The long and winding road through the Scottish lower leagues has taken us across every single inch of this wonderful country, and we have reached our final destination. Stair Park, London Road, Stranraer, DG9 8 Bravo Sierra.
Last again. They must really want to, like, Trinent get promoted soon.
Let's talk about their season last time. And it started quite brightly for Scott Agnew's team, but then they could never quite put together a consistent run of positive results, and as the season progressed, they slipped down the table, eventually finishing bottom, propping up the SPFL, and they took on the Lowland League champions East Kilbride in the League 2 playoff final, and my goodness, they really should have been dead and buried long before scoring a goal in the 117th minute and the 121st minute to win the contest 5-3 on aggregate. And that second leg is perhaps the greatest game of football we're likely to see this millennium. So please go and watch the 25-minute highlights package if you haven't already. It's brilliant. It's absolutely superb.
Extraordinary.
Like, I was talking to the gym that I go to. It's ran or managed by Peter Weatherston, who has stepped down as the Stranraer assistant manager, but I finally had the first chance actually to catch up because he's been on holiday and so on, and we've just kind of been ships in the night. But he was saying it's one of the probably the best moments I've had in football. Just the emotions that he had after that game, just never feel like that again.
And you wonder if they can kind of bottle it and kind of build on it. Like, I know I'm not comparing it with Montrose, but Montrose kind of, it felt like they've managed that. They've kicked on. It was interesting, certainly in terms of social media, they've said things like sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
They've never had as much sponsorship as they have right now in terms of like player sponsorship. Every single player is already, their home jersey, their away jersey is already signed up. So it feels like there is something there. Whether they've managed to improve the squad enough to really kick on, we'll see. But I'm not entirely convinced.
No, I think the aim for this season will just be simple. Like, you can't repeat last year. You can't repeat last year, and again, because of Edinburgh's position, Edinburgh feels like they're going to be the buffer. They're going to be the buffer between everyone else, and sorry to speak so dismissively about a team when everyone's working hard to try and get the best. That's the impression it's going to be. However, I think Stranraer, there's been a slight increase in budget, and that's given Agnew a wee bit more wriggle room to sign players. So, for instance, like Mark Russell coming in from Portadown, played with Greenock Morton, played with Falkirk. He's can play anywhere on the pitch. I always thought that he was just he could play at left back, could play one forward. He's been using the right in midfield in recent games, and I think that a lot is going to be expected from him. So I'll be keen to see how he does it. I think the other big signing, Adam Cummings, has returned from Stirling Albion. Can play at left back, can play at centre back, purely because he's left-footed. And I think he was quite well thought of at Stair Park the last time, but he did make a couple of wee boobies in the League Cup. So I think they're the two big name signings that they've made. There's another signing that they've made as well. Literally never heard of this guy. Robbie Fraser. I've even said his name wrong. Robbie Foster. Beg your pardon. Sorry, Robbie, if you're listening.
From Huntly.
From Huntly.
He was really kind of talked up, and when they announced the signing, there was very much. I was like, "This is a big announcement."
Yeah,
now, he might be class. Don't know, but they certainly when the updates that he performed pretty well on his debut. Don't know very little about.
No, I think they've got high hopes for him. He's come from Huntly, as you say. I think they were really excited to get him in. I think they beat off the competition for a number of clubs to sign him. I wouldn't have been surprised if Elgin City had been one of them, given the Alan Hale's association with Huntly. But he's like a big forward, quite quick off the mark, and I think they're really hoping that he can add something that was badly missing last season, because goals were the big problem last year.
So you're right. Those felt like good, positive additions. It still feels like there's couple of players that they wouldn't have wanted to lose. One you've already mentioned,
Dylan
Forrest. But every time I watched them, and I suppose it was because they were generally on the back foot, I was always hugely impressed by Lewis Budinaukas, the goalkeeper. I thought he was excellent.
Yeah.
And
he made some really big saves in those playoff games.
And rarely did he look particularly at fault for goals. He didn't, even though he was young, it didn't feel like he was doing anything that was particularly rash. It didn't really feel like he was letting in stinkers. They've brought in is it Harry Brown, I think he pronounced his surname.
Yeah.
I thought when I saw him a couple of years ago, I thought he could have kicked on. Doesn't seem to have happened for him. They also brought in Jacob, is it Pizikis or Pizikis?
Pizikis I've gone for, yeah.
He hasn't impressed. From what I've seen so far, he isn't at the level that Budinaukas was. And considering how reliant they were on the last line of defence last season, that does concern me a bit. Yeah, it does. I mean, especially if you play the entire season, you've effectively got a settled goalkeeper. Because if it wasn't that they started was it Martin McDonald, Ginge, was a goalkeeper they started the season with, and then I think he had to leave really unexpectedly because of work commitments, and they got Budinaukas in, who was really, really good, and then really established himself really quickly. So Harry Brown, obviously know him from his time at Dumbarton, I think, where he was expected to challenge Brett Long for the number one. It didn't quite happen. They ended up getting Hogarth in goals, and Brown went elsewhere. And I can't say I really know anything about Pizikis, but I've seen him a couple of times. He's possibly already made as many mistakes as Budinaukas did last season. To be fair, it's his first time being exposed, as far as I'm aware, his first time playing first team matches, so I suppose there will be a degree of nervousness attached to his performances, but I feel that as a downgrade.
Okay, well we'll wait and see. With that. The defence we're looking at, Craig Ross will come in there alongside Adam Cummins. I think he's a good defender, again good in both boxes. Someone who I think as well, because he's quite spry. If there are balls over the top, he has got a wee bit of recovery pace that he can come in and make a difference in. Further forward, really hoping that Grant Gallagher and Matty Grant can put their injury issues behind them, because I don't think we really saw the best of either player last season. However, Grant Gallagher, if you want to, if I'm saying make a bigger contribution, there is no bigger contribution you could have possibly made for that football club than the goal that he scored against East Clyde. I completely just popped into my head there. That goal was absolutely incredible. What a hit! Please go and check out the highlights of that match against East Kilbride.
If you're listening to this podcast, I would imagine you've already watched those highlights. Surely, goodness, I would be amazed if you haven't.
You must have done.
Dean Hawkshaw maybe playing a wee bit further forward. I like him as a player. Still there.
I hopefully he goes to the same barber that Scott Shepherd does and just says to him, "Listen, mate, just
it's over.
Just get rid." We mentioned and probably as well one of the stories of the season's return of Paul Woods, who was a Stranraer player 2 years ago, had a really bad injury. They had to actually get crowdfunding to get treatment for it. And he's worked really, really hard on his fitness, and he is now in a position where he's back able to play with Stranraer. So he's signed as a player coach. Probably won't feature too often, but I think he's again a very well liked figure at Stair Park, and someone who will be good to have around the place, and someone that Scott Agnew and Scott Robertson can lean on. Of course, we mentioned Peter Weatherson's a former assistant manager. He stepped down. Scott Robertson, who I think he's coming for his testimonial this year, he'll step in there.
What about the manager? What about Agnew? How much credit do you think he has in the bank? Because we spoke about it last season in terms of Stranraer have got rid of managers who actually had a slightly better record than Agnew. like if they started the season poorly, do you think they would look to maybe get rid of him?
I've actually got this down here that I think he could be the first casualty in League One, because I think that the club have gone out there. You've been well backed by the club. You were backed during the sticky period last time, and you repaid the faith ultimately by keeping them up. And we've given you the resources you need to go and put a team together. And if that's not repaid, then I can see them moving on. But I think it'll be the sort of thing. I don't say that lightly, because like Scott Agnew is very well liked at Stair Park. I've met Scott Agnew. I think he's a class guy as well. And it's nothing personal. It's just that we can't have a repeat of last season.
But I suppose what they will have, we presume this season, is the buffer.
Yes.
So maybe that. And also, I don't think they will be as poor as last season.
I was looking at the goals as well, were a big problem last season. And there's two players who chipped in, have moved on. Tamor had come back from Stennismuir. And like... Tamor's a trier, and I think again works really, really hard from the front. I don't think his return was quite what anyone was hoping for. He's moved on to Cumnock to reunite with Stephen Swift, who took him to Stennismuir. James Dolan is another player that moved on, and it turns out I was looking at the database of incomings and outgoings, and surprised to see that he didn't have a club. The reason he is studies Spanish.
Oh, really?
So he's looking at spending a year abroad. So
maybe the Spanish lower leagues.
There you go. So it's just like good footballer, good looking, multilingual. Oh, cunt, eh?
Not yet.
I think the other strikers as well, Darren Lang, that was better known as a meme than he is for his goal scoring exploits. But he did chip in with some important goals. And there's another boy called Ryan Edgar, who's a young guy, quite local. We say young guy, quite local. He is local. They can't be quite local. He is local to Stranraer, and of course popular amongst the home support as well.
And I'm sure it was Elliot Dunlop that scored the goal at Starts Park.
Boy, they've got on loan from Airdrie.
Yeah, he looked bright. And in terms of that game, it's difficult to take too much from it because it felt like a pre-season friendly. But again, Stranraer kept Wraith at arm's length. How much you can read into that, I don't know. But Dunlop's finish was very, very good. So there might be something to look forward to from him. Good.
It does feel, I mean, we're being quite, like, you're not being negative. Agnew, you asked the question. I think it was answered fairly. I do think there is a degree of positivity around Stair Park. And quite right, because when the local team, the local community come out to watch their team, they see what's at stake, and the team reward them with that level of performance. With, I mean, as we said right at the start there, they could have been dead and buried. I mean, those misses, my goodness. But then to hang on to the end, and for Craig Ross to score, and the boy, what was his boy, Fitzpatrick, what was the guy that scored, Fitzmartin, what was his name? Aidan Gilmartin, that's it, Aidan Gilmartin that scored that one and goal. Oh, extraordinary. Not my team, but I'm getting excited talking about it. And you would like to think that the people that came out to see them thinks that there's a club here that's worth supporting. I want to go and watch Stranraer, and you think that there's a wee increase in season tickets, an increase in the belief that the team can go one better than last season. We'll say one better is ninth place. Sorry, but you know, like the team can kick up and get into the playoffs next season. It's not. I think there's perhaps teams I would have ahead of them, but I don't think it's unlikely.
I've seen them talked about in terms of a dark horse for finishing in the top four. I think it'll be a very dark horse. I don't have them as
a black beauty,
quite capable enough to achieve that. I maybe have them about 7th.
I think so. We'll get a lot better, but I'm keen to see what. Just check. Not Robbie Foster. It's Robbie Fraser. No, it is, isn't it? It's Robbie Foster. It's Robbie Foster. My goodness. But the thing, I'm looking forward to see how he gets on. Not as much as I'm looking forward to the Stranraer TV highlights package. Tremendous. The best in the SPFL. It's been class as well since they've come back. So you just really have to say to Lawrence Nelson, Brian Martin, George Frank and Colin Ferguson, I will look forward to seeing your exploits once again going forward. You are a lesson to every single club in the SPFL for your highlights package. So Shaughan, to finish up our League 2 review, the winner?
Clyde.
I'll go for Clyde as well. Who is finishing in the promotion playoff places?
Spartans, East Fife and Peterhead.
I've gone for those as well. And who you got finishing bottom?
Edinburgh.
I've gone for Edinburgh as well. I just wanted to make it clear that we're not to give Edinburgh a kicking. We do appreciate there are good people working at the club, all trying their best. It's just on the balance of probabilities and how the squads are shaping up. So it's nothing. Please don't think that we've got any dislike towards Edinburgh. Those feels have to make that clear.
I mean, you don't speak on my behalf because I've been described as a Fife idiot in a group chat. So I do dislike them.
Right? Okay.
I'm joking. I don't. I absolutely don't.
You can never go to the capital ever again. Shit.
Just have to work from home every day.
Shaughan, that is us. We're finished.
Did we not have a word? Was it albatross?
If you let me. I've got this all written. I've got this all written down.
Okay, tell Fowler to delete that. we're at 8 hours and 73 minutes.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I think including breaks, this is 2 hours. I think that's 3 hours. So that's about 7.5 hours, almost 7.5 hours for a podcast. That's ridiculous. Look, I'm saying 7.5 hours. 7 hours 20 minutes for a podcast.
Why do you sound like you're trying to
auction something?
Sell a sheep?
I don't know. I was just trying to imagine how many words have we spoken for. I've gone delirious. I've gone absolutely delirious. We pitched up at Craig Fowler's house at 1 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon. It's nearly 9 o'clock. So it's been brilliant. I mean, I think there are some people we have to thank for this podcast, and the first is Craig Fowler and his flatmate, who I actually don't think was here in the first place. But Craig Fowler has been exiled from his own house again. But honestly, don't feel too sorry from this podcast is keeping a roof over his head. So there we are. We are putting bread on the big man's table. The other person that we have to say a huge thank you to is Laurie Spence. Laurie is the brains behind Nary's Toe Poker blog. And every transfer window, Laurie maintains a database of every single signing that takes place in the SPFL. It's absolutely invaluable for myself and for Shaughan. In fact, I think for everyone else associated with the Terrace when we were researching this podcast. So Laurie, do keep up the good work. And who knows, they might change the way work permits are distributed in the future and you can calm down for a little bit. There are a number of good people to thank for their help and insight into a couple of the clubs we discussed. In no particular order: Colin Telford, Alistair Gemmell, Evan McFarlane, Fraser Clark, Amy Canavan, Craig Brown and George Frank. And that, believe me when I say, the information, the hints and tips that you sent us over is always incredibly worthwhile. It helped us both get a great overview of some of the teams, so we're really happy for your time and your support. You never let us down. And the final person we have to thank is you, the listener. I was looking at you, Shaughan, you expecting if you're still here, you're still here. Because we appreciate your time and your patience, and we hope that you have stuck with us to the bitter end. Because if it wasn't for you, we would just be howling into the void.
It is always good to hear positive feedback. And the fact that like we always do this, and you'll be exactly the same. There's been people tweeting us to say, when is it happening?
That's good. I like it. I like that.
So it's always good to know it's appreciated.
Aye, that's great. So really, thank you all. Have a good time with your Bitcoin and your crypto and everything you're playing with.
And wrestling.
No, that's a Donald Trump quote. That's actually
he likes wrestling as well, though.
He knows. See when he got shot and he looked up to the he knows how it angles. But he was speaking at a Bitcoin conference, and that's how he actually finished his speech with. Guys, terrible politics, but very funny.
Yeah,
very funny.
Good online.
Now, Shaughan alluded to it there, but this is the code word. This is the secret word. If you have made it this far, if you have made it to the very end of this podcast, do get in touch with us with the word haddock. If you send us the word haddock, we will know that you made it all the way through to the very end. Real fans of lower league Scottish football make it all the way to the very end of this podcast, and if you're a real fan, you'll get in touch with Shaughan, you'll get in touch with myself with the word haddock.
I look forward to being tweeted the word haddock in September and being quite confused.
Well, Shaughan, I have no doubt you and I will be back at some point over the course of the season to talk about the beautiful and sometimes not so beautiful game we all know and love called football. So take care till then and enjoy yourselves. But unlike the young teams up and down the country that are really annoying Shaughan, enjoy your football, but please do so respectfully. Thank you. Take care.